thank you all for coming. Giving up a Sunday is not easy, especially when you have warm weather, which for me is a very special event. But I would be remiss if I didn't start by giving a cover to the Kvod Aksanya, that recognizing the work of the local people who made this happen. First and foremost, Rabbi Lyons, who is now the Director of Development for us in South Florida. I want you to know that he has an address that you can use, and he will be able to either help you or forward the situation to me, and we'll try to do whatever we can to assist you. And we have the privilege of having Rabbi Bauman from the Chevra Kadisha of Torah Semis with us this morning. Thank him for all that he does for the Chevra Kadisha for all the years, for friendship and support. It's really a very, very special place to be here. I'm going to try this morning to consolidate what we did in 2009, which is hard to believe is 5 years ago. It seems almost like it was yesterday. But I'm going to try to consolidate the first two parts of that program into the morning, the first half of today's program, and then we'll have lunch, and then we'll go into the second part, which is more of a hashkafic, broader nature. I think that we will try to spend most of the time on dealing with problems, which I think most of you are already involved with Chevra Kadisha. Is there anyone here that has never been to a Tahara? Terrific. So we have an experienced group, which means the focus can be a little bit different. But nevertheless, I think it is extremely important, as was the custom in many Chevra Kadisha, if not all Chevra Kadisha years ago. You take a look at the minhagim of the Chevra, sometime, usually at least once a year, the Chevra Kadisha would get together and go over their minhagim. It was something that was done regularly, and I don't think we can assume that these were Chevras that were not that active, because in most communities there was only one Chevra Kadisha in the community. And even a small community, if everyone is having Tahara, and where people did not necessarily live to be 90 or 100, but unfortunately there was a very, a younger rate of mortality and earlier age of mortality, I don't think Chevras were inactive. Unfortunately, they were active. And nevertheless, there was an emphasis on Hazorah. There was an emphasis on review, and as many Chevras did once a year, very often it was on Zion Adar. It was part of the Zion Adar experience was to review. And many communities, they would actually add a little tikkun, something that made the process a little nicer. Not that they changed the minhag, but that they emphasized an area that maybe could be made a little bit nicer, that could be made just a little bit more efficient. Because the goal is ultimately to give the greatest possible respect to this particular person. Each person is an individual. For them, it is the only tahara they're going to have. And if there's something that can be instituted that in a particular situation will make it better, or if in all situations will make it better, then that is certainly very worthwhile. Again, not to change anything, but only to somehow create just an efficiency or a detail issue, where you focus on something more in a greater detail, with greater focus, with greater sensitivity. And so, with that in mind, we will begin. So I'd like to run through some very general concepts that apply to Chevra Kadisha. Kavod Hames. What is Kavod Hames? Kavod Hames is the recognition that this person was a Jew, and therefore we treat them with those traditions that we have handed down from generation to generation, really for probably 1,000 years. Certainly the first Tahara was recorded was the Tahara of Hillel HaZaken, which goes back 2,000 years. It was slightly different, but in general terms it was the same. A little bit more of washing. In fact, there was a much greater emphasis on washing, maybe because people didn't shower that much in those days. I'm not sure. But whatever it was, there were like 11 rechitzas, with soap, without soap. They rinsed again. It's fascinating. But the point is that it has been almost the same Tahara process throughout the centuries. But Kavod HaMeis is extremely important to understand that it's not a subjective Kavod. It's not what I think is greater Kavod that I would like for me, or that I think would be best for them. But it's what has been transmitted from generation to generation. And every one of the minhagim, every one of the traditions that we follow has a source, a very meaningful source. We don't always know the full spectrum, all the reasons behind a particular minhag, but we know that a minhag Yisrael has a great deal of meaning and depth, and therefore we're extremely careful not to change anything. Sometimes the more we look into it, the more we learn about a particular minhag, and they all have meaning. And the more I have spent time looking at specific minhagim, the more educated I became about what Kavod HaMeis means. So it's really fascinating, but therefore we are extremely careful not to change anything. And even in a situation where we must change things, because the person is in a condition where we can't do what we typically do. That too is minhag Yisrael. That is the way it was done 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago when a similar situation existed. So there is a minhag, there is a tradition for everything that we do. I hear sometimes the funeral directors say to me, Rabbi, they don't need a tahara, the body's decomposed. To me, I think it's the reverse. If the body's decomposed, that's almost more reason why the Chevra Kadisha should be involved, because if they were not involved, all kinds of things might be done that would really be very, very contrary to what Kavod HaMeis is meant to be. So it's important to understand that everything comes from our tradition, and nothing is subjective. It's not what we feel or someone else feels is the best way to do it, or the most appropriate way to do it, or the most respectful way to do it. Everything is based on the fact that we recognize that every Jewish person, every person actually, is in Tzelem Elokim, is created in the image of Hashem, and therefore they are deserving of kavod. And the body was that which housed the neshama, the soul, which is a chelik elokam imal, something that is an actual spiritual essence of Hashem himself. Hashem blew the neshama into every person. Each of us has a very spiritual part, which is extremely holy. And our belief is that the neshama at the time of a tahara is really very much present and very conscious. We're dealing with a person, not with a body. It's a person that is there who is perhaps more sensitive and more aware and more conscious than any of us are, because they're no longer in a physical body which restricts them in a very physical way. They are the full experience of who they are, the full experience of their life, with an understanding that they are now on the threshold of moving to a higher world, a world that is a spiritual world, a world we call the Olam HaEmes, the world of truth. Okay, where there is nothing superficial, everything is real. And so they are very aware. And they understand at that point what is kavod, and they are very focused on the fact that they want the body that housed them to be treated with care. There is still a connection. While they're ready to move on, they spend the last 60, 70, 80, 90 years merged together with this body, and so it is still something that they are very much concerned about. So the kavod that we give them is extremely important, and it's objective kavod, how we understand kavod from a traditional perspective, which really represents all of our beliefs. The reason why we do what we do as opposed to what the secular world might do, although they too want to give respect to their loved one, is based on our understanding of the basic concepts of Judaism, which is there is a neshama, there is a spiritual part of us that lives on eternally. That's first and foremost. Second of all, there's an olam haba, there's a world to come where a person at the end of life has to stand before God and answer questions about their life. What better way to be dressed for that occasion than how the Kohen Gadol was dressed, how the high priest was dressed when he stood in the Kadisha. We're about to read all of those parshios. We started with the building of the Mikdash, of the Mishkan. We're writing that part of Torah that we read every Shabbos, and now we're going into the Karbanos and how the Kohen Gadol was dressed on Yom Kippur, Parshas Hachrimos, just a few weeks away. So that is the most respectful way of dressing a person if we understand what it is that we're doing, what it is this person is now, the position that they are in at this point. We obviously treat the person themselves with tremendous covet. We're extremely careful. In fact, yesterday I was privileged to spend this past Shabbos as a scholar in residence. And one of the questions that came up at the lecture I gave Friday night, which was kind of an open discussion, was a more informal setting, and someone asked me about the minhag of hashkava, putting a body on the floor. And they said there's a minhag among Sephardic Jews, there used to be a minhag of Sephardic Jews, that they actually used to kind of drop them a little bit. I don't think it meant from up high, but maybe as they were putting them down, just a little bit harder than maybe they would otherwise, a little bit less gentle. I don't know that that is, but certainly one of the reasons that we place a person on the floor is because it's similar to the worst possible form of capital punishment that was meted out years ago, and therefore if they were deserving of something that was terrible, they would have already paid the price in this world. Okay, it was similar to stoning, so they would put them on the floor, which was made of stone in those days, or certainly marble and so on. And the question that he asked me, is this an appropriate minhag to drop somebody on the floor? So I answered him, I said, I'm not familiar with anyone who does it today, even in the Sephardic community, and I'm not sure that it was ever done exactly like that. But there is a minhag to place a body on the floor. The reason is not only that, the main purpose is to keep the body as cool as possible. Years ago there was no refrigeration. Sometimes it took time. Lying in a bed is very warm, and they had no air conditioning, okay? And therefore, the main reason that is brought why we put a person on the floor is because that is the coolest place in the room. Not just that it's a stone floor which is cold, but heat rises, and the floor is where it's coolest. But there is also a secondary reason that we mentioned before. So there are many reasons. There are other reasons as well. Reasons that have to do with tumah and tahara, with maintaining purity, and so on and so forth. But the point I said to him was, I told him a story. I said, there's a well-known story about a person, a man in Detroit, Michigan, who left a will recently, not very recently, probably about 25 years ago, judging by the person who answered the question, who's already not with us for about 10 years. But the point is, he left a will asking that he be dropped on the floor. I guess he saw the same minhag that this person was talking about, and he wanted that when he passes away, they should, not from up here, but, drop him a little bit, so that he would go through this process. And they asked Rav Box, who is the posek in Detroit, should they do this? He said he can't allow it. He says it's not the minhag that we follow. He said, but he suggested that since this was the man's wish, he said when you're doing the tahara, maybe when you're holding the hand at one point, to me, I always remember that because I always think that when Chas v'Sholom are in the tahara room and you're a little less careful, it's almost like skila, it's like it just gave me a certain insight into how he viewed how important it is to treat the person with covet. So it's not that we should think that Chas v'Sholom, we drop a hand in the tahara room, we just stone the person, but it certainly is something that we should recognize is extremely important. Now, we'll take questions at the end, but let's try to keep moving. Bleeding from the mouth, the nose, and the trach. The trach is this hole that's here. The trach is the hole that you see right under the neck. It's a man-made mouth. That's really what it is. Treat it as a mouth. Okay? Now, the mouth or the nose, the way to deal with it, if there is fluids coming from the mouth, let it flow. As you turn the body, and I don't know how many times I have taught how to turn the body. I really did not plan on doing it again. I'll just show it very quickly. But the way to turn the body, the proper way to turn the body, is to place the foot in the direction in which you're going, the arm on the chest in the direction in which you're going, 3 people standing on that side, okay? The body should first be moved, okay, as far to this side of the table as possible, okay? Do that while you're supporting the head. Never move the body without supporting the head. And then you have the middle person holding at the shoulder and the pelvic area, like this, okay? That's how you do it, standing on that side of the table, lifting at the shoulder, the pelvic area, and the people on either side of them are supporting the shoulder and the pelvic area, so that it does not move. You got that clear? No. Let's do it. Maybe let's do it.
You need a demo. Yeah, you need a demo.
No, I think it might be easier from this side because they can't see. Let's reverse it. You're turning the other way.
To a side view of the table.
Everybody's lined up this way, so I think it'll be fine. But here's the story. I could use one more person up here. Okay? Now, I always say the person turning is the man in the middle, the woman in the middle. I consider the person the Rebbe, the one walking with 2 shamasim on either side. Okay? A shamas on this side, a shamas on that side. And we're doing all the work. We're entitled to have a shamas on either side. So now, the goal is to move the body as far to the other side of the table that you are, so that there's enough room so that when it turns, it's not going to be right up against you. Okay? The point is you don't want it to slide. These people on either side are going to act as a wedge. They're going to stop the body from moving. That's their purpose. Okay? Where they hold is in the same place where I'm turning, which is also the parts of the body that is solid. Okay? That's where the best place to turn is. It's the shoulder and the pelvic area. So, if you don't mind, if you could support, we will turn like this. If the head falls off, don't get frightened. Okay? Now, what you become, if there is there's no headrest here. You want to just hold the head. Thank you. Okay. What has just been accomplished is, I'm holding this body, I'm keeping it steady. I'm not supporting its weight. The body is supporting itself. Okay? You're not going forward with the faces down. It's just basically supporting itself. This arm has no pressure on it. It's free. There's nothing that's going to bring blood out from a puncture in the elbow. There is complete visibility here, so that I see what's coming. We were talking about fluids coming from the mouth or the nose, right? How do I know if it's fluids or blood if I can't see what's there? Because I'm right up against the body and it's flowing this way. I won't know if there's anything bleeding in the arm. I won't know what's coming. Here you have full visibility. Full visibility. Okay? So that's, if it's fluids that's coming when you have this turn, let it flow. If it's blood, immediately put it down and do what I'm going to tell you to do. But you can keep it flowing. At the end, wash the table down with water, okay? Turn the body the other way as you will, and let it flow again. Usually by the time you've finished washing the body, especially if the table's been angled, it will have stopped flowing, okay? If it continues to flow after the tahara, you're going to have to pack it even if it is fluids. But as a general rule, it should not be necessary. However, if it's blood, you're going to need to pack it immediately, and that's what I'm going to show you now, how to pack it. Okay, so let's go back.
Demonstrate turning without anybody holding.
Okay, sure. Without anybody holding, let's assume that you do everything else. You move the body far away, you have the foot over in the right direction so that nothing is dragging, you have the arm here, nothing is dragging, but the person weighs 150 pounds, okay? You've just washed the body, the table is wet. The typical thing that's going to be is, as you try turning it, the body's going to slide right up against it. And what's going to end up happening is that you're holding the body like this. It's extremely heavy. You have absolutely no visibility. Okay? What? You're at the end of the table. There's nothing, no visibility at all. Okay? And it's
The person on that side.
the person, oh, very good point. The person on that side who's washing the back is extending all the way across the table. After you do that, especially if it's a difficult case, you have a backache by the time you finish for the tahara. There's another thing. If you have to pack rectally, which we very often need to do, you have a body like this, this weight is right up against the rectum. You can't pack very easily. When the body's turned on its side, there is none of this weight is against that, and the packing is a much easier process. So for all of those reasons, I recommend turning the way in which we turn. It's extremely worthwhile to get, and the key to doing this is it has to become routine. There is a reason why we call it a Seder HaTahara. It's an order of Tahara. Why do we have a Seder on Pesach night? Because we know exactly what we're doing. It's routine. There's Kadisha, Chatz, Karpas, the kids come home from school, they sing the song. Everybody knows. Why is there a Seder? Because there's a lot of things to do. And you may forget to break the matzah, and you may forget to do this, you may forget that. So there's a Seder that we follow. And it's the same thing here. It has to become routine. It has to be orderly. It has to be constant. If you're going to decide, does this body need people holding, we manage on their own? It doesn't work. It needs to be, first of all, this way everybody moves into position. As it's time to turn, everybody knows you've got to get over there to help and support. It's just automatic. No one has to say anything. It's routine. Everyone has to be on the same page. Okay? Now, so again, we're talking about packing the mouth or the nose. If there is blood coming from the nose or the mouth, if it's the nose, let's try to do this very quickly. I would make a little ball about this size of a pea, insert it into the nose, and with the edge of a clamp, okay, I don't think I would use something sharp there, clamp would probably be better, just bring it up to the bridge of the nose. Try to insert it to right here, which is the narrow part of the nose, okay? Then I would take another one that is a little bit smaller, maybe the size of a lentil, okay, and put mancels on that and insert it into the opening right here, okay? And what that will do is, actually I take it back, the second one will be bigger, but it's enough to pack it, okay, but not to push the other one in, okay? And just leave that against the first one. If it does bleed through, or if the first one saturates, the mancels on the second one will stop it. On the other hand, we don't want to put mancels into the body, so therefore we leave the first one without mancels, the second one with mancels, it works. If you are packing, if you have a mouth that's bleeding, now you want to pack the mouth. The tendency is to think that the best way to pack a mouth is right down the center. That's not the way you pack a mouth. You pack a mouth by making two things. You have two pieces. Okay? You pack one, make a little head to it so that's a little tighter at the end. You pack it along the side of the mouth. And along the side, the other side of the mouth. So that when it comes through the mouth, it's coming through the sides, not through the center. You want to pack it along the sides and then bring it across the middle. So that it'll stay closed, and that's it. No mancels, just pack it. All right? Now, if it's a trach, I would put in a piece like this. Again, put it in, it can go as deep as you want, it doesn't matter, as long as it goes in. And then on top, I would go below the surface of the skin. On top, make a little ball that will fit in. Put little mancels on the bottom of it again, and then pack it below the level of the skin. You don't want it protruding, you want it below the level of the skin, always.
You put a body into the mikvah that has been packed, the nose and the mouth?
Why not?
They're going to absorb more water in the back.
The mouth should never be filling with water. If you, we'll talk about the mikvah, I don't know if you're from BRS, I'm going to be there tomorrow, but if not, our minhag in this community, most communities in this country, is not to use soap. In Eretz Yisrael, in Israel, they do. There are some Sephardic Jews that do. And as I said, the Tahara of Hillel HaZoken had soap. Had soap, had no soap, done differently. But our minute is not to use soap. I personally am not a big fan of using soap for a number of reasons. But if you need to use soap, and there are times where you do, for example, if the body has a layer of grease, sometimes the only way it's going to be removed is I would try a drop of warm water first, which very often is sufficient. But if not, sometimes soap is the only thing that will do it. Certainly when you have like Vaseline or Desitin type of ointments, very often you have it by burn, you have Silvadine, or sometimes in the groin where a person was incontinent and they're wearing diapers and they have basically a diaper rash. And they put on Desitin or something like it, okay? That you want to clean off. You can't rub it with warm water or anything else. It doesn't work. You just spread it. And the more you rub it, the more you're going to hurt the skin because it's there to help the problem of the skin. So the skin is always bad. So what you want to do is, if there are globs of it, sometimes they put on, you just remove the globs with a cloth. But if not, I would take a cloth and I would, here you want a lot of water, you want to soak it in water, and use some soap from a dial soap dispenser, wherever it might be, okay? Use soap, get it very sudsy. I would put it on that area, on the surface, leave it maybe for half a minute or a minute, and then go over it very gently with warm water, just washing it away. If you run out of soap, take a little more soap. Do not rub. Just very gently on the surface. What you want to do is remove the Desitin. Soap and water breaks down these ointments. They're made to be removed with soap and water. So what it does is, it just breaks it down, and you'll see the skin will stay red, but you won't injure it if you do it appropriately. Use as much water as you need. By the way, there's a misnomer that when you do the rechitza, when you wash, you have to use 3 buckets of water. It's not true. Use 5 buckets of water. You can refill and refill and refill. Be generous. There's no water shortage, certainly not in New York these days. There's no you have to use as much water as necessary. So here you might need to flush a lot of water, but you will not injure the body if you use soap, and that's how to remove it. And that's where you need to use it. For the men, sometimes there's tape across the face where there were tubes going into the mouth or the nose, and that tape will not come off without soap, because the soap will break down the tape residue that's on the beard, which is usually growing underneath, and sometimes the skin is very sensitive. If you go over it with soap, it will break it down and it'll come right off and the skin will be fine. So in those areas you need to use soap. Now, intravenous tubes, okay? They come in different forms and different sizes and different places. I'm going to try to show you, I feel bad, Rabbi Lyons is not here because it would be a good idea to have this on tape, but on video, but we'll have to do it anyway. Maybe we'll move and come back to this.
Wait.
Okay?
We got it. Go.
Oh, it's taping?
Go back.
Go back. You
Go back.
do it? Okay. Let's assume this is the tube. This is a tube that you will find in the groin. Not a tube you're going to see in the neck very much. It's a tube you will find in the groin. It's it will be somewhere about here, okay? And you'll see this. Now, it might have some stitches that are holding this in place. You want to cut the stitches. It might also have some tape in the area because there was betadine or whatever it was, because at one time there was, as they were doing it, they might have put some betadine there, whatever it is, or some iodine. Okay? Cut the tape and clean everything before you remove it. Cut the stitches. Clean the area so that there is nothing that needs to be done after you remove it. It'll be fine. The only thing you need to do is to stop the bleeding. Okay? You then want to do a few things. maybe it'll be better if we show it up here, only because I think it'll be easier. Let's try to find one that we'll find there that's typical. This looks like a good one. Too good. Oops. Okay. This is a scary one. Looks very frightening. You see this coming out of the neck. Now, by the way, all this will be in the neck. There'll be only this, it'll be coming out at this point, and you'll pull and pull and pull, and it keeps coming. It's just that it's threaded through the arteries, okay? Now, it's just one tube. Clean the area, snip the stitches, clean it, and then I would do a couple of things. I'm going to sit her up, so him up, whatever it might be, so that you get to see what it is. Let's say it's right over here. Taking care of the stitches.
Sitting her up.
No, that's just so you can see, right? We would not be sitting her up. Thank you very much, Mrs. Brown. Now, so you would be doing this. There are two things that I would do. Number one, know that this is going into a major artery. It's either the carotid artery, it's going down this way to the aorta, and you can tell. I would stop the bleeding from this hole by placing my finger about an inch away from the opening, by placing pressure on the artery and the vein that is leading to that puncture site. You can assume that the vein is going along the center, like in a Y, towards the center of the chest, which is where the aorta is, okay? And so about an inch lower in that trajectory is where I would just place pressure against the collarbone, against the rib, whatever it might be, okay? Then I would do one more thing. I would pull a little bit. As I put the pressure there, I would give a little tug on the skin. What you're doing is you're also closing the opening, okay? What you're doing by pulling it is the vein gets smaller, because when you pull it, you're just clamping the vein, okay? Making the hole smaller. Now, you would take a Q-tip, just in position, hopefully it will stay. You'll take the Q-tip and fluff it. I suggest using Q-tips, because they really have more cotton and they're easier to fluff. And I would make sure the Mansell is fresh, shaken well, and you put it in. And put it in a few times so that the cotton will saturate with Mansell's. Okay? Then, Mansell solution, we'll talk about that. I'll show it to you what it is. It's a solution that is a coagulant. With that pressure and that pulling, you have it ready. You can have someone else do this if you like, so that your hands are more free. You pull it out and immediately go into the puncture with the Q-tip, so that the Mansell is not only on the surface, but actually goes inside the puncture. You can separate the puncture so that it goes in, okay? And it will stop, it just won't bleed. I will tell you that 98% of the time, we don't have any bleeding at all when we remove the tube with that kind of process. Now, there are times where a person might have been on Coumadine. There is a person that's very heavy and there's a lot of internal pressure, and sometimes it will bleed a little bit. But when you do this, it's going to help to a very large extent. It's not going to bleed profusely usually. If it's an opening that's bleeding profusely, have a... Go ahead.
So can I just clarify?
Yeah.
You're really describing there's three things that are happening. There's the pressure on the pressure point. There's somebody holding a Q-tip, and then there's also the extraction of
the tube.
Of the tube.
Right.
So you may need three people.
Nah. Can I be honest with you? I do this myself all the time. It's not necessary. You can have one person. I can be right here, applying the pressure, having this in this hand, okay? And with my other hand, just pulling out the tube and immediately putting it there, and it's fine.
How long do you have to keep the muscles in there?
10 seconds or less. Sometimes I go in a second time. I just put a little bit more in. I'll go in a second time. If it's really a situation where you see that there is blood coming, then have this ready. It could be the edge of a scissors if you want, but I find this is excellent. Just have a toothpick ready. If you have this fluffed, just take the cotton and just put it right into the opening. Just plug it with the cotton. The cotton is full of ourselves, then it will not come under any circumstances.
I mean, leave it there.
Leave it there. Leave it there. The only thing you have to be careful with that is that when you dress the body, that you make sure that this is not, it's going to leave, even in, whenever you pack, whenever you use mancels, there could still be some mancels oozing. So you want to check that when you're drying it just very gently, or if you're not sure, take a piece of tape before you dress it and just cover that spot. But as a general rule, it may not be necessary, but if you're going to pack it, it's always necessary. Because the cotton that's in there will be wet, okay? And when the tuck region touch it, it will dirty the tuck region. So make sure that you remove it. But that's how I would remove these tubes, yes.
This is a procedure, general procedure for tubes anywhere on the body, or specifically?
Specifically tubes that are intravenous tubes. We're not talking about urinary catheters. We're talking about tubes that are intravenous. However, there's one other little tube here that's in my arsenal, my little bag of tricks. This is a tube that generally goes into the higher up on the body, not in the groin. It's not here. It's usually in the center of the chest. There are a few different variations of it, called the Hickman or Broviac. They're different. They probably have new names by now. This is in the center of the chest, and you know that when you pull on it, it's not coming anywhere. And it's not like if you're going to extract the blood, it's going to collapse a balloon, which happens in some instances. This is something that is either sewn in internally or it attached itself internally, and it's not going to come out. So now you have two options, okay? One option is, if this is long enough so that you can make a knot of this itself, then you can take a clamp a hemostat, take it, and there's another way that's even better. And that is to take that Q-tip we had before, okay? Make sure that you have a lot of cotton fluffed up and that there's a lot of mancels in it. Pull this up a little bit and cut it right above where the clamp is. And then when you release the clamp, it goes right into the body, and then put in some cotton. Now, if it's going to bleed, which it probably will, it'll bleed internally. There will be no loss of blood. Nothing's going to come out. Okay? But it's certainly much more recovered than leaving a tube in the body. Okay? So that is how to deal with a tube that does not get easily removed.
The second option, why is it necessary to clamp?
Because if you don't, then you want to make sure that, it's a very good point, but you want to make sure that when you're cutting it, there's no blood going to squirt out, which it will do. It will stop it enough to bleed. It clamps it. Even when you remove the clamp, you push it right in immediately. It's probably, you don't know what's going to be there when you cut, and it could just squirt. So it's more, you have more control. I think that's really the only reason. Okay? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I have a question. What if there is, the balloon with the tube for the urine?
We didn't get to that. We will get to it. Okay?
Tell us what the name of that clamp is. We have some nurses who aren't here that's going to ask.
Clamp? It's a hemostat.
No, I meant the tube.
It's a Broviac, it's a Hickman, it's any Hickman, a Broviac, it's any tube that does not pull out, which is in the top of the chest, basically. Most other tubes that I know will come out. Usually, I don't find that, sometimes you find it going into the carotid artery up here. Usually not, usually with a little pull it comes out. Those are different. These are more attached. Okay, now, let's move on, okay? Because I don't want we to spend all day on this. It's worth it because that is the most common thing that you deal with. But nevertheless, I think if you follow what we just said, it'll be fine. Now, we'll take questions at the end, but let's try to keep moving. You don't need, if you need a cloth, or you need some cells, or you need something to mine, that's great. There is no reason to do any talking that is not necessary in the Tahara room, but whatever is necessary should be said, and should be said loudly enough, so that all those who need to hear it will hear it. Making sure that we say all the tefillos, that we wash our hands appropriately, efficiency, cohesiveness, working together as a team, making sure the order is correct, making sure that there is a rosh at every tahara. Every sefer you look at mentions there's a need for a leader. And that's all part of efficiency and seder and order. So there's no bickering, there's no misunderstanding, there's no who's going to tell us what to do or who should do what. There is someone who is designated as the person in charge, and they are the one that is in charge. That person is the leader for this tahara, and we sometimes send out 4 people who are leaders. But at any given tahara, there is always a designation of who is the leader for that tahara, so that's the person that makes the decision. It's very possible that a person might, in a difficult situation, say to others in the room, "What do you think?" That's appropriate. There's nothing wrong with that. They can discuss it. If it's going to be a long discussion, maybe better to do it outside. But the point is, certainly that's permissible. It's not like this person is in charge and can't ask anything and has to make all the decisions on their own. But certainly a decision that they made is a decision that should not be questioned. If there's any question, I suggest that the question be raised privately later, either with that person himself or, if necessary, with the person who answers the questions for the Chevra Kadisha in a way that is respectful. How we dress is all part of Kavod HaMeis. And I don't mean necessarily modesty, obviously, is part of it, but it's also efficiently. We should be dressing in a way that we're not uncomfortable to do what we need to do. If there's going to be some water on the floor, we're not going to pour enough water because we're afraid that we might get our feet wet. That is going to minimize the kavod that should be done. Okay, we want to be able to use as much water as we need. So this is part of Kavod HaMeis. We should come dressed appropriately, but we should also come dressed efficiently in a way that we are comfortable, so that we can do what we need to do in the most comfortable way. Today, that probably also means having gloves, having something that covers ourselves so we're not worried about what might splash on us, something that can be discarded afterwards or cleaned afterwards. Being prepared. Being prepared means having enough time. It means if you're going out to a tahara and you have 45 minutes to spend, it's not a good idea. That's not being prepared. And it's not fair. It's not fair to the other people who are there, and it's not fair to the person on the table. For them, I always say this, for them, this is the only tahara they will ever have. It is their moment to be given respect. It is their preparation for the world to come. And you might have another tahara the next night, but for them, this is one or the same night, or before and after. But for them, this is the only tahara, and therefore they deserve to be given as much time. Obviously, there are going to be situations. You're dealing with someone who has to make a flight, and sometimes there is a need simply in order to give this person the respect to be able to bury them in time or whatever it might be. You might have to work more quickly. That's a different story. But even there, spend as much time as you possibly can give them so that you do it in the most respectful way. In a situation like that, it would be a good idea to add a person to the team so that someone could be working more on the setup and doing things a little more quickly. Maybe you need someone coming early to set everything up so that when you get there, you'll have all the time possible to work with the body, not knowing what you're going to find, and sometimes it takes a little more time. So all of this is part of preparation. Obviously, supplies. Make sure that you have all the supplies at all times. All the supplies that you might need. It means shrouds that are particularly large. I mean, we run into this all the time. We now have, every one of our leaders carries, we go to a lot of different funeral homes. Sometimes a funeral home runs out of shrouds, extra size shrouds, and they just don't have it on hand. So we have our leaders carry an extra size shroud in their car. Okay, the women carry a woman's set, or if they have a unisex set, which has a headpiece for men. And by the way, you should know that the size of shrouds for men and women are exactly the same. You disagree? No. Okay. I saw you shaking your head. No, it is. I know because the manufacturer told me they use the exact same size for both. The only difference is the head covering. If you have a 2X or a 3X or a 5X, those are different sizes of shrouds. But men and women are not different. The shrouds that are muslin or that have a braided front might be different than the hand sewn in the set. That's a different, they use a different pattern. But you've never seen a braided set, that's a good thing. But the point is that whatever it might be, the sets are the same. Know that, but you should carry extra sizes with you. And this is the problem that we all have. But if you work with a specific funeral home, it makes it that much easier. If you use one, make sure that they replace it. Call them the next day. Make sure that they know to replace it. And they don't have to order men and women. They can order it as a unisex. They all get it from the same, pretty much from the same manufacturer, and they will manufacture it for you with both head pieces in there so that you could use it either way, so that they need not stock men and women's sets in every single size, okay? It could be the same set used for both. Be prepared by discussing questions in advance. If you know there's going to be a difficult case, a large person, the person is decomposed, a certain type of surgery, an accident, whatever it might be, check as much as you can in advance so that the tahara process itself can move as efficiently as possible. Review, which we talked about. If it's a man, make sure the talus is there. If it's a woman, make sure you have a Jewish name. And for men as well, but also for women, make sure you have the Jewish name, if that's at all possibly available. If you know the person could be large, make sure that the aron is there. Sometimes it might mean that a tahara, I don't know if this is capable for every Chevra Kadisha, but if it's possible to do the tahara when the aron is already there, it's certainly preferable to doing the tahara when the aron is not there and have to rely on a funeral director to place the body in the casket the next day. There are many things that we do that may not be done if that's what's going to happen. Extremely important to understand that we cannot put a premium on any one minhag or the value of any one minhag. We can't say, well, this is really important, but this is not so important. If it's a minhag, then it's a minhag, then it's a minhag, a tradition is treated like a law. The laws of tahara are minhagim, they're all traditions, okay? And we treat each one as a din, as our set of laws which we follow, unless the law says it has to be done differently in this situation. But otherwise, every tradition has equal importance. We sometimes get to a funeral and we use egg and vinegar. Okay, it's a mixture that we make. Not every Chevra Kadisha uses it. We have rules that if someone gets there and somehow, as they're taking the egg, it drops. Now there's no egg. Okay, we'll send someone out to buy an egg. Okay, there's a shomer there, we'll send the shomer out to buy an egg. Thank God there are bodegas that are open 24 hours a day now. There are, whatever, stores that are open 24 hours a day. Every, whether it's the gas station that has a dozen eggs, whatever it might be, you pick up an egg. Okay, and the same is true for vinegar. And the same is true if you have no Israel earth. If someone in the Chevra may have some in their supplies or another Chevra, do whatever you can to make sure that you are supplied, and that if not, that you try to get what is necessary. Uniformity, try to do the same for everybody. I got a call from a Chevra Kadisha outside of New York, outside of Florida. Someone called me, he said, Rabbi, I'm speaking at the Zayin Adar dinner, and in our Chevra Kadisha we find that when it's a member of our own community, it's much easier for us to do the tahara. But if it's a member of someone who has no community, or someone who is from another community, we just find that there's just not as much excitement. What do I tell them? I told them, tell them what the Torah tells us. The Torah teaches us the laws of giving respect to the dead by a person who's a criminal, by a person who really didn't make it, by a person who really was not the very most respected person in the community. That is the person the Torah teaches us deserves all the respect that we can possibly give them, because they are they are created in the image of God. It's not us for us to judge them. They are treated and given the same tahara as is the rabbi, the president of the congregation, or the wealthiest man in town. It makes no difference. So it's an extremely important understanding that while the eulogy might be different, and the crowd of people might be different, what we do is exactly the same. Important to understand that we are not trying to establish minhagim here. We're not saying this is the way it should be done or must be done. It is important that the minhagim, the traditions that you follow, are bona fide traditions. Sometimes there is networking that goes on among Chevra's Kadisha, and sometimes some very serious mistakes could creep into a Chevra's set of rules because someone came up with a brilliant idea that we can wash the body with a hose. But that's not the way a body is supposed to be washed. Just using that as an example. Okay? Or we can place the gartel in the aron, and when we put the body into the aron, the gartel is right there. We don't have to turn the body, get it under, or slip it, or do what we have to do. It's right there. So you put the gartel in, lay it out over the casket, and you put the body in. It's a great idea. That's not what we do. It's not the tradition that we follow. Each chevra is meant to dress the person fully, just as the Kohen got dressed fully. And that's what we need to understand. So there are sometimes, because someone has a great idea, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's an appropriate efficiency. So all of those things are extremely important to remember. But certainly the goal here is not to establish specific minhagim. I've said this many times. People ask me why I've never written a book. I've done more difficult things. I could have written a book. I could have had someone else write the book. I just never wanted that there should be a set of minhagim. This is what Rabbi Zohn says is the right thing to do. Because I lecture all over the country, I don't want that. But I do reserve the right to say that this is a minhag that I am familiar with, or a minhag that I feel is appropriate. There are many, many different traditions that we don't follow, that others do follow, that are appropriate. But the point is that there are traditions that are appropriate traditions, and there are some that may not be. Just some very quick things that I mentioned last time, which I'll mention again. We have a policy that every month we add a tikkun. We add something not only every year, but actually every month. It comes out about 10 times a year. We add maybe less, 8 or 9 times a year. We add something that makes the process a little bit nicer. I'll just throw in a couple of them that I think is very worthwhile. One is to have a board in the tahara room with the Hebrew name of the person on the board. It also helps for identification purposes, so everybody knows the name of the person. We should check the tags, every single tag, and if we have the name on the board, it's very easy to check. But also if the hand drops and you want to say, please excuse me, and you want to refer to them by their name, you want to say, please forgive me, the name is right there. When you're saying it, you don't have to shout across the room. Do you remember the name? What was that, Sarah, or was it Esther? Okay, it's right there on the board. You can see it, and it's just an appropriate thing to do. The importance of ID, making sure that every tag is exactly the same, checking every tag, not just one tag. Okay, placing the cloth on a counter that is not absorbable, so that you can place all of the blood in that one spot, so that you don't lose something because you put it somewhere and someone else didn't know what it was and they discarded it. This way you always know where the blood is located. Always maintain the head higher than the rest of the body. Okay, this table is a terrible table for tahara. It would be totally unacceptable, even if you put a headrest under the head, because you want the fluids to drain. It's also more becoming, more respectful if a body lies with the upper part of the body higher than the lower part of the body. Using only damp. If you're using a wet cloth that drips, and as you're cleaning the blood, what drips next includes a little blood in it. So now you're chasing the blood down the table. Much better to use only damp cloths. To know what is blood, what constitutes blood that we save and what does not. Set up aron outside of the room, or at least in a place where if something drops as you're setting it up, it doesn't get dirty. Not always easy to get a new set of shrouds. So whenever you set up the shrouds, make sure that you set it up in a place where if something falls on the floor, it's not going to now be filthy. These are all tikkunim. We didn't change anything at all. We just created certain protocols that make it less likely for something to go wrong and more likely for things to be as efficient as possible. Checking the aron when you come in, take a look at the casket before you set it up and see what the body looks like. Is this person going to fit into that aron? Okay, sometimes people will not fit into a specific aron. Okay, probably more so in New York where the graves are smaller in many instances. But for whatever reason, a person could be very distended, or a person could be in a fetal position where the legs are going to be very high. If you have a wedged box, it may not fit. So see that before you set up the aron, before you start the tahara. Now you can work on this, or let the director work on this while the tahara is being done, so that at the end there's no suddenly there's no wait. It's better for us, and it's better for the person who is having the tahara. All of these are extremely important concepts. How to turn, so that the body is turned as much as possible without facing downward, but enough so that the body doesn't slide, so that the body is turned and you can wash the back carefully so that the person holding doesn't hurt their back. All of those things are important. Again, if the person who is holding is comfortable, the tahara will be much more respectful, much more efficient. If the person who's holding is straining, it's going to be much more difficult for every aspect. Never raise the head at the neck from here, which is how we normally would imagine you would raise the head. Always raise it from the top of the head. The reason is very simply, when you put your head at the bottom of the neck to raise the head, you're bringing the head back, which opens the airway and allows fluids to come up. If you lift the head from here, you're closing the airway and the fluids will stay down. These are just good pieces of advice. When to hold the head, when you don't need to hold the head. Never raise the legs more than necessary. An inch off the table is sufficient to put on the shrouds. When you're putting the body into the casket or onto the tahara board, it's sometimes very natural to just raise the legs way up into the air. Besides the fact that it's not respectful, no one would like to be in that kind of a position. But it's also because it puts tremendous pressure on the bladder. Very often, especially when you're dressing the body, suddenly there could be a flow of urine that could easily dirty the shrouds. Okay, so these are all things that are what we call tikkunim. It's just ways of doing the tahara that make it less likely for things to go wrong and give greater comfort. Knowing what kind of water to use. If you're not using a mikveh, it should be cold water for the tahara and lukewarm water for the washing. Not hot water, not even warm water. Lukewarm water is appropriate for the washing. There may be situations where you may need a little bit warmer water, never hot water, never very warm water, but sometimes water having a little bit more warmth. If someone is particularly dirty or someone is greasy, it might be sometimes people have lotions that are put on that are somewhat greasy. If you have a little bit of warmth to the water, it takes care of it much more readily. Sometimes you may need to use soap. Knowing when to use soap. We'll talk about that a little bit later. The survey. What I call the survey, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, but the survey is that part of the tahara process which does not appear in any sefer. The survey is what you're doing when you're undressing the body. As you are undressing the body, the part that gets uncovered is checked to see if the skin is sensitive, if there's a tube, if there's anything stuck to it, if there's tape, whatever it might be, a bandage. And at that time, before you actually start the tahara, is the time that you would remove tubes, the time that you would take off bandages, the time that you would deal with tape. Because once you start pouring water, it's very hard to find that tape again and to see it and be able to remove it. That's the time to deal with it. Nail polish, that's the time to deal with it. All part of the survey. It's a good time to talk. Time to let everyone know of a particular problem that needs to be dealt with. If you see a problem, let people know. if you're not dealing with it, but it's a problem that is a potential problem, there's the beginning of a bed sore, okay, on the heel. There's a blister on the heel. Let everyone know, because the person standing on this side doesn't see the heel on the other side, and so on and so forth. The washing. The rachitza is meant to be a washing. It's meant to wash the body well. It's not just a routine pouring of rinsing the body, but it actually means that if there's dirt on the body, or tape on the body, or lotions on the body, or certainly if there are other things attached to the body, that's the time they should be cleaned. That is how it is described as the way we would shower before a Yom Tov, before a holiday, before Shabbos. We want it to be clean, and that is the goal. The ears, we don't go into any orifices, not only the ears, the mouth, anywhere else. We don't go digging for things. But if you turn and you see that there is dirt there, or as you put a cloth in, it's clear that there is dirt, you are meant to clean all of these things. If you look and you see there's dirt on the nostril, it should be clean. You don't go deeply inside, but what is visible should be clean. The tahara process, knowing how to use the mikveh. If you're using the mikveh, keeping the head raised at all times throughout the process. Care not to get the water into the mouth. Knowing what constitutes the amount of water that is necessary for pouring Tisha Kabbalah if you're not using a mikveh. And just because you have a mikveh doesn't mean you always have to use the mikveh. There may be times where you don't want to use the mikveh. There are certain incisions that perhaps if you put a person into the mikveh, it's going to bleed. But if you can pour the water with Tisha Kabbalah, it won't bleed. So that might be the appropriate thing to do. You always have to keep that balance in your mind. Making sure, as I said, not to get any water in the mouth. Sometimes you may want to stand up the body. It's a little more complicated. I don't know if we'll get to that today. On boards, pouring up and down, as some chevras do, or shooting the water over the head, which other chevras do. Dressing the body, making sure that everything is as respectful as it can be. Dressing the body as appropriately as you can. If you see that a shroud may not fit, go for the extra shroud, go for the extra size shroud, rather than have to schlep and pull if you have that available to you. Asking the person to forgive you when you put them into the Ark. To dry the body well. I must tell you, there are some very fine covers Kadisha that I know I've attended taharas with, and others have attended taharas with, that just don't dry the body well. The body's meant to be dried. It's meant to be dried. Using clean sheets. Making sure that the order of dressing is the order that you normally use. Being consistent. How much earth do we put on the face? If it's not on the face, I don't know that it matters that much. But if it's on the face, do we just empty whatever's left in the bag? Or is it just a little bit is brought down? It should not be a huge amount of earth. It should just be enough to fulfill the custom, to fulfill the tradition, to fulfill the milah, but it should not be a tremendous amount of earth. We also put Chevra on the eyes, so there are other ways we're placing earth on the eyes as well. So just a little bit of buffer is sufficient. The broken pieces of pottery should fit on the eyes. They should not fall off. They should be large enough to cover the eye, and they should fit on the eye in a way in which they will not fall off as soon as the aron is closed. Making sure that the head in the aron is raised properly and will not fall side to side, but that it actually will sit on the pillow, so that even when the aron is moved, when they lift it up and carry it into the hearse, the head will stay straight and raised as it should be. These are all general rules of cover. I'll take a few questions if anybody has them at this point, and then we'll move on to the problems of the tahara process that we will deal with commonly. And I'm going to take the opportunity to take a little rest. Okay, yeah.
I actually have a question. You were talking about the blood on the table earlier, if there's bleeding. What if when there's blood on the table
any blood that comes from the body, or that came from the body in the bag that the body came in, it was there from the hospital, which we can assume left the body after the person died, okay? That blood should be buried with them. Use a damp cloth, like I said before, clean it, and then place it on that cloth that you designated as the place where all the blood should go, and you save it and bury it with the body. Again, you have to know what is blood. There are some times where you'll have some mucus, or you'll have some urine that may be a little reddish in color. That's not blood. But that which is blood, that needs to be saved, that is blood that should be saved under all circumstances. If there's blood on the sheet that came with the body, assume it belonged to the body and cut it out and take it along. If there's blood mixed with body waste, if it's really mixed, you would discard it. The only time you would not, if blood is dirty, is blood from an accident scene, where the blood may be mixed with all kinds of crazy things that are there. It's dirt, it's in the car, it's the seat, and there's all kinds of stuff there. I would save that because that blood is of a different nature, but that's not what we usually deal with. If you have blood in a typical situation that is mixed with dirt, with body waste, I would not save it, but if there's, let's say, body waste on the chuck, and there's blood around it, and you can cut out that part of blood that is clean, I would definitely do that and throw away the rest. Okay, yes, Rabbi.
As part of the beginning process should be to check the table before you put the body on, just to make sure that it's clean.
Absolutely.
Make sure there's nothing from previous.
I mean, first of all, when you put a body onto the table should be clean, not only because of the blood issue, because in general, why should this body be placed on the table that was not clean? I remember probably 25, maybe more, years ago, I once had to do a tower at another location. It was not in Queens, and they used a wood board, okay, a wood tahara board. And after years, there was literally, I must tell you, in some parts, a quarter of an inch of gook, dirt, that was just accumulated. No one ever washed this thing. I must have spent at least an hour, literally back-breaking work, just cleaning this board before I would let them put the body on. And I was asked to be in charge of this tahara, but I was not in charge of this Chevra. They were not happy. They were doing tahara with 2 people. It was a very different situation, and I was horrified. I said to them, how could you do a tahara? How are you cleaning a body when it's lying in dirt? Okay, even if the dirt is caked. So the fact is that the table must be clean. Yeah.
We have the prayers both in English and in Hebrew on the wall. So should we take into account, usually we decide based on who's there and can read stuff on the wall, but should we take into account what language the mace would have understood when
It's a very, very, very good question. It's an excellent question. The question was, should you take into account the language that the person spoke when you decide which language to say the tefillos in, for example, okay? The answer is, if the tefillos are being said in Hebrew, then there's no problem. You can say the tefillos in Hebrew for anyone, even if they do not understand Hebrew. Okay, Hebrew is the essential language the world was created with. It has special Hebrew, even though we may not understand it. But if we're not reading it in Hebrew, and the person only spoke Hungarian, probably should try to, if someone there speaks Hungarian and can translate somewhat, they should probably say it in Hungarian. Okay, and it's an interesting question. Same as with Mechila, same as when you ask him to be forgiven. You can ask forgiveness in Hebrew. We sometimes use Yiddish. Minhag to use Yiddish, and recently we changed. We made it Hebrew. It was one of the tikkunim. We discussed it, and it made sense. Not everyone spoke Yiddish. Okay, so even though the Chevra's years ago, we carried the custom forward where you always said, "Zaykin's Moichel," that was the tefillah. Okay, but since many people today don't know Yiddish, okay, and they did know English, and they're not saying it in Hebrew, so we now say it in Hebrew for that reason. But if not, then I would say, you know, if it's a person you knew spoke English, you could probably assume that most people today speak English. But if you happen to know they didn't, I would either have someone say it in Hebrew, or I would have someone who could translate it in whatever language it is that they spoke. But it's an excellent question. So the answer, just to answer your question, I would try to have someone read it in Hebrew. That is certainly the best way. If there is no one that can read it in Hebrew, you can certainly read it in English, assuming that most people speak English based on that assumption. But if you knew that the person did not speak it, it should be in a language that they spoke, or see if you can have someone who speaks Hebrew come in and read it, okay? And that's, and certainly the same is true when you ask forgiveness, preferably in the language that they spoke, unless it's going to be asked in Hebrew. Yeah?
The change from asking Mechila in Yiddish to asking Mechila in Hebrew, how would you distinguish between that and different drastic changes under the guise of tikkunim?
It's not a drastic change at all, because the truth is that we were asking in a foreign language. We asked a shayla. It was a question that was asked from a perspective of what makes sense. The reason we said it in Yiddish was because we never wanted to change. That was why it was always said in Yiddish, because that's what was said.
Because that was the minhag.
Hundreds of years in the Ashkenazi community. I'm sure in the Sephardic community they never said it in Yiddish, right? Or maybe in Ladino, I don't know. But the point is, so we asked the question, what is the right thing to do? And sometimes the right thing to do, let's put it this way, for years we first started doing no mikvahs. And they built a mikvah. Do you switch to a mikvah? Do you not switch to a mikvah? It's a similar kind of question. And there are some communities which got a psak, which got an answer, you should not change it. And there are some covers that felt that using a mikvah is a step up, and you should. So, but that is done by someone who knows halacha, knows how to deal with these issues from a much greater perspective, whom we would follow. But it's not something that we would do on our own.
And you would distinguish between that and, let's say, putting the gartel in the aron?
Yes,
how?
Putting the gartel in the aron is changing a minhag without any reason other than your own efficiency. Here the reason is because the mace doesn't understand what you're saying. So today no one's speaking Yiddish, and if Yiddish is not a language that the person understands, so what are we doing? And that was why the question was asked. So it was giving us to understand that it did not make sense to do it. And it's preferable to say it in English if you can't say it in Hebrew. You can say it in Hebrew. And Hebrew is a language that we, it's a universal language. Okay? So I believe in the Shema will recognize it. Yes?
You spoke about pottery on the eyes. You didn't mention the nose or the mouth.
There's no pottery on the nose. There's only pottery on the mouth, which might go right under the nose, but it's not on the nose. It should be really just covering the mouth.
Right, but you didn't mention that.
I didn't mention it only because I was talking about earth, and I mentioned placing there. We don't put earth on the mouth. We only put pottery on the mouth. So I just said that another reason why we may not have to pour so much earth on the face is because we're going to be covering the eyes with earth in any case. So that's why I referred to it, not to say that the eyes are the only part and not the mouth.
You have some questions?
I'm sorry.
I have a few questions. Can I ask you questions?
We'll see how the first one goes.
Two are practical and one is more esoteric. So the first practical question is, we have a mix with the lady is completely covered with really big blisters full of blood.
I'm going to stop you right here. We're going to get to that in the second part. Save it. If we don't cover it, we'll come back. What else?
And another question having to do with language. We always start with the feeling and the feeling, and the feeling that we use is in the past tense. It's all past tense. I personally always say it in future tense when I see it, but it's written in past tense, and I think most people...
Because the general, I'll tell you why, because the general minhag was always to say that the mechila at the end. Not every Chevra Kadisha actually says mechila at the beginning, asks mechila in advance. So if you know Hebrew well enough, if you say it in English, and you could certainly should say it in the future tense, if there's anything we're going to do that is not according to your kavod, please forgive us in advance, because you're actually asking them.
You could actually write it up in the future tense.
Why not? It would be excellent, beautiful tikkun to do for your kavod.
But the fact that if one person's doing it in the future and others are doing it in the past, that's not like an inconsistent.
I would have everyone say it in the future in the first part, and past in the second part. Okay, that's what I would try to do for everyone. If you could create it, let everyone adopt it. Here's another perfect example of where you're changing something, but the change is because there's no reason not to change it. It obviously was used when we decided to ask mechila in advance as well. Some terms do. We only had a nusach, we only had terminology that was for the past, what was done. So, but I think it's appropriate to do that, no problem.
And the more esoteric question is, if a person was conscious until shortly before the calculate, you could sort of understand that the neshama is still kind of hanging for a very long time. Is there still some sense that now that this is constitutional, they weren't their
It is very clear that the neshama is present with the body until the body is buried. Now, I've said this many times, and I sometimes lecture on the afterlife. Very fascinating lecture. I wish I knew what's going on in the afterlife. I only know what's brought down because people think I have some picture what's going on out there. I don't. But the point is that it is very clear that the neshama, there's a presence of the neshama. There's a presence of the neshama at a grave. After the burial. I'll prove it to you. We don't wear our tzitzis out at a cemetery. The halacha of not wearing your tzitzis out in Shulchan Aruch is actually brought at a cemetery, not at a tahara or a funeral, because there is something, and the neshama is not a unit. We think of the soul as something that is, has limits. It's either here or it's there, because we're not realizing that the spiritual world is not confined by time or place, okay? So it's very different. But a neshama there can be a presence of the neshama still here, even though the neshama is in the Olam Ha'emes. It doesn't mean that the neshama is a unit. There is a presence, an awareness, a consciousness, something that remains at the place of the burial. Okay, but I think there's a greater presence of the neshama with the body until before it takes place. Okay, so certainly that's not a difficult concept to understand. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, question. You mentioned that there's an issue with the Rosh says just wanting to speak afterwards. Is there ever a time after the Tahara to question the Rosh or to?
It's a very excellent question. And I think that judgment has to be used very, very carefully. But if you think that something is really egregious, and if you feel that it's something that you are extremely uncomfortable with, especially if it's obvious that other people are uncomfortable with it, I would call the Rosh out of the room and ask, how she feels about this in a very respectful way. But it would have to be something that really is egregious. Okay? I don't think it's a question is, do we save this blood or do we not save this blood, where it really is a mixture and it was their decision. Should we pack, should we not pack? They made the decision we should or should not. If it's the wrong decision, they said don't pack, and you think they should pack, you may find out quickly enough that they made the wrong decision. They'll realize that themselves. But the point is that if it's something that is just a question of judgment, I would say fine. If you feel they have forgotten a part of the process, a normal thing, we all forget things. We have a tikkun that at the end of, we would always find, we'd be halfway through the Tahara was done, the body was in the mikveh, came out of the mikveh, someone said, anyone clean the nails? Okay, it's a typical thing that someone forgets, okay? So we created a tikkun that when you're finished cleaning the nails, you say the nails are done. So now we know that the nails don't hurt anyone say it. It's something that, we can, because otherwise everyone assumes it might have been done. Okay, I'm just using that as an example. But if you think that it's something that's really egregious, that, I'll never forget the important thing to know how to make a pillow. A pillow needs to be made. I always say it needs to look like the stuff you wear on the plane. Okay, it needs to be a pillow that has a soft spot. It needs to look like a kidney bean, so that it's higher at the edges and kind of comes lower to the head so that the head stays on it. And there's a very nice way to pack a pillow with the straw. Use one tuft of straw rather than little pieces, so that it's one unit. And fill it from one direction. If you're going in, fill it along the side that does not have a seam. You have the pillow has a seam on one side and no seam on the other side. Just keep stuffing it in from one side, pushing it towards that side which does not have the seam. When it's full, then just pull off whatever might still be attached to this tuft, and you'll find that you actually have a kidney bean shaped. And then, of course, you play with this. Now, when the head is on it, it should be comfortable. We also build up underneath the pillow as a tikkun, something I discussed with Poskin. We build up up in every single aron. We place a straw underneath. It's just like a little well along the sides, where the pillow will go, and the head sits on it so that the pillow doesn't move. The pillow is really very small. The person has a larger head. Even if a pillow is the right way, the head will very naturally fall off. Okay?
Under the soul bed?
Everything is under the soul
Under
bed.
the soul bed.
In the aron itself, you place some straw, you place the pillow on top of it so that the pillow is sitting and it's held by the straw. It's not going to move. And then if you make the pillow appropriately, the head sits on it like a regular pillow. And it's just very becoming. Yes?
Is that the question?
Yes. I'm sorry. Is there anything that could substitute for straw? Would the Rabbi open to anything other than straw?
The only other thing that I know of that is used, first of all, straw is really part of the aron. Well, I'll look at that, but the straw is not straw. Okay? I imagine if it was real straw, it would probably be okay as well. But, I mean, not if it smelled like hay. There are companies now that are making caskets with hay inside, where you open it up and it smells like the barn. I'm not kidding. And I hate to tell you, this is in South Florida.
Right.
They're made. Okay, this is the hub of the hay casket. Okay, so when we have a body that comes up, usually it comes up in a casket that already has hay in it. We open up the casket, it feels like the person's lying in a barn. Okay, so we take out the straw with the hay, and we replace it with our own straw that we normally use.
Which is wood shade.
Which is really wood. So it's like the casket is made with it. It's one to that. The other thing that I would probably accept, which was a minhag for many years, and is still a minhag in many parts of the world, which is to put earth, actual earth, into the pillow. The problem is that if you're making that underneath the pillow, it's not going to stay there, okay? Because it's just going to start sliding all over the casket. So I don't think it's, but to make the pillow with earth is a minhag that's been accepted in many communities. I remember being in Mexico City to give a shir. In Mexico City, the Chevra Kadisha, the tahara is done on the cemetery, and they actually take earth from that person's grave while they dig it, and they put it into the pillow, and his head is lying on the earth from his own grave. I remember Uraim chapels in Williamsburg had a big bucket full of earth, okay, which they filled the pillow with. They used a lot of earth. Yeah.
My grandfather used to do Kadisha as a young man in Cuba and then in Mexico. I know that women can do men. And one thing I have never heard, or maybe here, is my grandfather used to say that if that person was religious, he had to be very good at tzitzit.
Tzitzit? Yeah, with a talus. That is correct.
No, the tzitzit that he was wearing over. Never heard it. I mean, I heard
The talus gadol. The out of the talus we wear in shul. That is the custom. That is still the custom. Everywhere. Everywhere. Not only in the Sephardim, but also the Ashkenaz. Only in Israel.
Not the tzitzit.
No, the talus with the tzitzis, but we take off, there are different minhagim, some remove one of the tzitzis, some remove only one of the strands, but they vary with the talus and the tzitzis.
He did that in Cuba, then in Mexico. He did that in Mexico. He did exactly the same.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I know because I heard this, and it was kind of shocking when I went here to see the difference.
Okay.
Even in
Many things are the same, there are some slight differences. Okay? Now, I'm going to take just two more questions, and then we'll continue. Yes?
I actually have two questions. What about the holes in the casket? Some people say that we don't have to do holes, and some people say that we do have to do holes.
It's preferable to do holes. Before you leave today, you'll find we're going to hopefully present something that has bigger holes. Okay? But then we'll talk about that.
And also, my last question, when you were talking about, we have for the eyes of stones and the eyes and the mouth, when the mouth is open, do we put the piece of stone inside the mouth?
No. Just make it large enough so that it covers the mouth. In fact, it's a good thing to actually close the mouth, and if you can't, to cover it. So make it large enough. It's one of the reasons I always recommend using a flower pot, because the flower pots are round. A 6-inch pot is perfect. If you take a 6-inch flower pot, okay, and you cut it, then you'll always have a piece that is, you can make it large enough and it's rounded so that it'll sit on the mouth and cover it as necessary.
So you're saying that we have to go with the eyes?
Okay. Preferably the mouth should be closed, but if not, that would do it, yeah. He was the guy with the, I'll take it. Yeah.
Thank you. You mentioned before about not putting the gartel in the aron, but there are some other things that I've seen done preset. So I just want to make sure. For example, the talus gets preset sometimes in the aron, and they put the person down on it. Sometimes we don't put the uffer, the egg, or the cheres while the person is on the mace is on the table. We wait till they're in the aron so it doesn't move, so the dust doesn't dirty them, so the egg doesn't get on the tachrichim. Those things are okay to do when the person's in
That was always the minhag, and I think the difference is that the avnei, the gartel, is one of the malbushim that the Kohen Gadol wore. When we're dressing the body is dressed before you put them into the aron. The talus is really something that's over, like the soveh. The soveh on before also. The talus is something that is external to the regular set of clothes. And therefore it's okay to put the talus into the aron first. That's how everyone does it. We also put the Chevra and the earth on in the aron, because that's where it will be least likely to move. We put it on before, as we put it in, it moves all over the place sometimes. So therefore, that's always the way it was done. The egg and the vinegar, on the other hand, was always done before you actually dress the body. Okay, it was always done on the table, not in the aron. I shouldn't say always, but that is how it's generally done.
So you do the egg and vinegar before even the tachrichim?
Right, the egg dough should not be something that dirties the tachrichim. It should be egg white. Okay, even though there are chevras that use the yellow, but egg white and white vinegar so that it doesn't dirty the tachrichim. Especially in our world, where very often there are identifications that are done. Yes?
Could you clarify where that package of dung would go if there is no urn?
That's a very good question. Hopefully, you would have a funeral home that you can trust, that they will put it in, and they can just leave it right next to it with maybe a little note on it saying, please put it to the aron. If not, we have had funeral homes where we do not trust them, and we would sometimes place it actually between the legs right here, so we made sure it would go in. Sometimes even like inside the kittel, okay? So that when the funeral director put it in, they wouldn't even realize it's there. But that's only places where we didn't trust them to put it in. Okay, there are many problems that, it's one of the problems we have where we're dealing with funeral directors that are not Jewish and certainly not necessarily traditional, don't respect tradition necessarily, where we will find sometimes where we open an aron, we still find the dam from a previous body because they have to change the casket for whatever reason, but they never took the blood out, so now it's in this casket. So there are a lot of problems, but I would probably leave it next to it with something on it, but if not, I would probably put it in between so that it would go in. I think we've already, there was one more late. Can we hold it till later? I'm afraid we're not going to get through the program. All good questions. Yeah.
You mentioned before about the minhagim of the Chevra, as far as laying the body on the floor. If the nifter and nifteris, left a request to say a certain prayer that is not the minhag of the Chevra, like for example, Shlosh Esrei, the 13 attributes when they're tying the belt. It's
a very good question. As long as they're asking for something that is appropriate, I would probably fulfill it. First of all, saying the Yud Gimel Midos, there are actually chevras that do. They usually say the Hurachud, but I've seen it brought. Okay, but I don't know that if that was a tzavah that someone left, I would probably accede to it. But if it's something that is wrong,
honor it?
I would honor it. Right? Okay, I would honor it. I would try. If our meaning is to say Hurachud, I would maybe say both, to say the Yud Gimel Midos afterwards, whatever.
But there are also chevras that put I was part of the chevra that put the body on the floor, straw first.
But they didn't drop the
straw first and put the body on the floor.
That is a minute that really every chevra should follow. That's a hashkava. That's brought. Everybody should do that. But that's the right thing to do.
I'm not
Yeah. This is not in Muncie? Were you part of the Chevra? In Muncie was it?
No, in New York.
Okay, fine.
Brooklyn.
Yeah, no problem, there's many members do. Okay, let's move on.
You said the soap has to be put on the table?
No, I said just the opposite. I said the soap is not put on the table, it's put in first, but that's not a shortcut, that's the way it was meant to be done. So the same with the talis, the garter was not. Okay, the garter is a short. How many Chevras Kadisha call me and ask me that, or when I lecture, they're telling me they put the shirt inside the kivla, and they put them on together. Okay, and they brought me a proof that it's right, because a lot of the things we don't do in life is because that's how the Chevra Kadisha does it. We know we don't put on two garments together. It's brought down, we shouldn't do it together. We should not put on a shirt and a sweater at the same time, okay? So they brought a raya that must be the Chevra Kadisha used to do it. That's not the case. Not the case, okay? Chevra Kadisha didn't do it, and it's not the way a person should be dressed. It should. Okay, so we talk about blisters. So any blisters, if you just clean it, sometimes there will be an area where the blister still has skin covering some of it. You should try to clean all the blood out from under that, and then just take the Q-tip and go underneath that flap, so that you're covering the surface of the skin that's bleeding. That's really what you want to cover. Okay? Let's talk about feeding tubes. We're up to that. A feeding tube is what they call a peg. It's usually a hole in the stomach where there is a tube that comes out. Now, I remove every feeding tube. Now, I will tell you that it takes a little bit of guts the first time, because it does have tension against it. But know that every patient in the hospital who has feeding tubes tend to pull them out. And they pull them out, they don't hurt themselves, they pull them out, because they're just uncomfortable for them, and they pull them out. If you give a little tug, just a quick tug, right out. Doesn't do anything to the skin. It'll be just a regular hole. You didn't do anything to anyone. Just pull it out. Because if you don't pull it out, it's going to stay there. And it's going to leak anyway, unless you want to make a big clamp and have them just a feeding tube sitting there. But you pull it out. And I would say that 75% of the time, nothing happens. It's just a hole. You do the whole tower and it stays. And that's it. And there's no reason to deal with it. Yes?
What is this leaking?
I'm going to get to that. That's the other 25%. There are times where it does leak, and sometimes what comes out can have a very bad smelling odor. But the point is, leave it. When you turn the body, you do this, remember, you're doing all this in the survey. You're doing this before you even start washing. As you turn the body, it can flow very heavily. Sometimes, looks like a fountain. It's like just, it can come out. Why should the person be buried in all that junk? Okay, it's really what it is. It's junk. So let it come out. Let it flow. When you turn the other way, it might flow again. If you are careful when you place the body in the mikveh, and again we'll talk about that when we talk about the mikveh, the question then becomes that what do you do? If now you've finished the tahara, you're about to dress, and it's still coming. You know that when you turn to pull down the shrouds, it's going to keep leaking. So you have this same stuff again. I would go into the opening with a piece out this length. Okay? It's not as thick as when you pack rectally. Make a little head to it. And you again insert it. It could be with the edge of a scissors, with the edge of a clamp, with a toothpick, whatever it is. Just go into it till it's below the surface. You may want to make a little head to it again so that it's tighter. Okay? And here, you have to judge. If you think it's not going to be a problem, just this, leave it. If you think it's going to come through anyway, and sometimes it actually almost fills as you're putting it in. This is the one place, or one of the two places, but it's really the one place. There are a few options actually now. There's more options. This is the one place where I would consider using glue. Because nothing else works, except for something else which I'll show you in a minute. I am not a big fan of using glue in the tahara process. However, when you pack this, if you pour a little bit of crazy glue, something like it right on the cotton. Don't get it on the body, just on the cotton. The cotton is below the surface. It will harden and it'll be fine. Even if it's wet. And if you want to, if you push it just a little below the surface, you can take another little drop of, I'm talking about really a drop of cotton. Just put it right on top of it and put on a little more. And that'll stop it. I have never had a problem where it did not stop with that very easily. Okay? There's one other option, and that is if you want to use Tegaderm. Tegaderm is something we are now using occasionally. It's very expensive, which is why many Chevras do not use it. It comes in a lot of different sizes, pretty much the same shape, but a lot of different sizes. So let's use the smallest one that I have with me, which is this size. Tegaderm is it's called Tegaderm.
What size is this one?
This is very small, whatever it is. This is much too big for that. There is a much smaller size than this, okay? But what you want to do with this is, it's basically, you see sometimes a body comes with like a plastic on their hand covering a blister. That's what this is. It's very simple. You have to learn how to use it, because if you don't, if you're going to try to take all this off and just use the plastic, it's going to not against itself, it's going to stick against, you'll never be able to do it. So you have to learn how to do it. You can take it. Now, basically, it's made for people who don't know how to use it. So, let me show you how it works. I'm saying it's made for people who don't know how to use it. They made it very simple, so it's user-friendly. What you want to do is, when you take off the outer layer, there's one part on the inside that has a little open piece, and then there's one side that covers the whole thing. The sticky part is under here. So this still has a border which keeps it in place. So as you take this off, you put it over that area, dry the area first so that it will stick, cover it, get it flat because it's easy, it still has the border and there's tension, you pull it all the way off, and then once it's on here, you just remove the border. And it's sticking fine. Okay, do you understand what I just did? You remove the border, remove the solid side, okay, while the border is still there and the sticky side will be exposed. So then you put it on while this border is still there, put it on the area that you want to cover, and then once it's on, and it's perfect, you remove the border and it's done.
What do you do when you don't have Tegaderm?
Okay, so you don't have Tegaderm, you use the crazy glue. That's what I just told you. This is instead of crazy glue. If you don't want to use crazy glue, you can cover this, put a piece of cotton in, cover it with this, and it'll be fine. Okay? Now, all right, so that is how I would deal with that. A Foley catheter, which is a urinary catheter, you can do it one of two ways. The simple way, one thing you should be very careful about, do not pull on it, because just the slightest pull on it could very often cause bleeding. It's not going to come out without releasing the pressure that's there. So what you want to do is just cut the tube, let the urine flow. Do it obviously after the person's been taken out of the pouch or the wrapping they come in. When they're on the table, undressed, covered, just cut it and let it flow. It'll flow for a few minutes, it'll stop. You can wait a minute or two and then it just pulls out very gently. Okay, and that's it. The other way is to put in a syringe. If you're fancy and you have syringes, you can put in a syringe, pull out the urine that's there, and it collapses the same balloon, and you pull it out again. Okay?
If there is a bleeding because we pull it and we didn't know how to do it, how do we stop the bleeding?
You stop the bleeding by packing it exactly the same way. The same is true with rectal bleeding. If you have bleeding from the rectum or bleeding there, you just pack it with some cotton and a little bit of cells and it'll stop. Okay? That's it. Now, but you have to be, as I said, very, very, very careful, okay, when you're removing it. Now, one more thing, sometimes there are tubes in the mouth, or even in the nose, intubation tubes, and they too have a little balloon inside. If you try pulling them and they don't come out, what you need to do is you'll always find a little thin plastic tube that is coming from that's alongside it, and it has a balloon at the end. Cut the tube, that collapses the internal, allows air in, that collapses the internal balloon, and then you just pull it right out. So you'll always look, wherever you have something going in the mouth and the nose, sometimes it goes into the trach, okay? And just cut the balloon, cut the little tube that comes out, and the balloon will collapse, the outer balloon will collapse, the inner balloon will collapse, and then it pulls out very easily. Okay? If there's bleeding on it, if there's blood on what comes out, save it, and pack the mouth or the nose or the trach, just like we discussed before. Okay? Bed sores come in a lot of different sizes and shapes, usually in the center of the back or right here on the pelvic area. It's a perfect reason why you need a survey. I just showed you that we turn the body by putting your hand here. I'm on this side. I'm washing on this side. I don't know what's doing here. I can't see. So as you're undressing the body, you want to let everybody know there's the beginning of a bed sore here. There's a blister. There's very sensitive skin. I'm sorry I keep looking this way or that way, and I haven't been looking to you guys, so please forgive me. Now, so you let people know that there is a sensitive area here. And before you turn, the person on the other side will tell you, hold over here, or hold over here, rather than right on that spot, okay? Now, if you don't touch it, very often nothing happens. Sometimes there are dry bed sores. It's like almost like a scab color. Don't touch it. Let it be. It'll be fine. Sometimes there are huge holes. I would try to remove the packing that's there, certainly the covering of what's there, and the packing that's inside, just replace it with a cotton. Take warm cotton. You can put them on cells on the cotton. First get rid of all the junk that's there and clean the area. Always clean the area before you do anything. And then pack it inside. Now when you pack it, it's not the hole that you see. Where the blood is coming from is all around the inner edges of that hole. Because the hole is just on the outside. Underneath it's much deeper. Underneath it goes much deeper than what you see. So you want to insert it with the edge of a hemostat. I probably would try not to use the scissors in this type of situation, but a hemostat will work fine. Or sometimes, even if your hands have gloves on it, even with your hand, if it's that big, you can just push it in alongside the whole perimeter, okay? If you feel it would help to pack a little more in the center, fine. And here, nowadays, I would say the best thing for this is using the largest tegaderm you have, and just cover the entire area with tegaderm. Dry it again if you have a body turned the way we showed you. It's so much easier to work. Everything is flat. Everything is straight. Dry it, then just cover the entire area with that plastic. It'll stay. Okay? That's the way to deal with it. All right? You can put the body in the mikveh. You can leave it there afterwards and dress it, and it'll be fine.
At times the body comes with tegaderm already on it.
Excellent question. If it's on a bed sore, and you're pretty convinced that if you remove it, you're going to have to deal with a lot of issues, and it's really fine the way it is, not leaking, which is very uncommon, by the way, I would probably leave it. To be very honest with you. In a bed sore situation, where you have it most frequently is on the hand with this blistered skin, I would remove it, because very often you see a big puddle of blood here, which in the tower process and the dressing process might very well begin to bleed. Okay? I would probably remove it very gently, and sometimes one of the tikkunim we had recently, which is a very nice addition to our little set of tricks, is that as you start removing it, take a Q-tip, dip it into nail polish remover. And as you start taking off the plastic, just go along with the nail polish remover. It dissolves the plastic as you go. If necessary, put it in the other end and get some more nail polish remover and just very gently go over it. Some people say shampoo works, other things. This works exceptionally well. This way you're not going to tear the skin, and very often as you remove it, there's almost nothing. There's a little tiny speck that you put a drop of Moncells on it. It's perfect. So I would remove it that way as a general rule. In a bed sore, you have to make a decision. I'd say most of the time I would probably remove it, but if it's really perfectly closed, I probably would leave it. Yeah?
What's the difference between when, because you explained it,
that's a whole different thing. Tegaderm is see-through and very soft and very simple. There are harder plastic pads that looks like it's thick. Actually has a thickness to it. And those very often are much harder to remove without tearing skin. Again, if you do the same thing, it might work. If you see that the skin is tearing and you can't stop it, I would leave it. Okay? But other than that, I would probably remove those as well. Because very often when you're removing those things, there's nothing underneath. They put this on as the skin begins to deteriorate. Depends on which level you're at. What happened when the person died, how long they were before they were refrigerated, and so on and so on. So I would always try, if you see that you're tearing it, I would try to use this. If that doesn't work, I would leave it. Okay? You know you're going to tear it off and the whole skin's going to come off with it? I would leave it. Okay? You got to stop it. And the way in which it's done is people jump into the grave after the person is in the ground, and they lift the cover, and there's a grip, something they hold on to that pulls up a panel on either side from the bottom, and the person ends up lying directly in the ground. I felt that while this is a very nice thing, in Israel we bury without a casket, and it's certainly preferable if we could bury without a casket.
Is that, even in Chutz La'aretz you would recommend that?
Sure. It has nothing to do with Chutz La'aretz, Eretz Yisrael. Yerushalayim. Okay? All right, because very often some Yerushalayim calls me about cremation. That's why I asked, because I wanted to be able to give you this goes on all the time. It's very sad, but it goes on all the time. Now.
Okay, so in other words, so if we were in a state where there was no requirement by any state, county, or municipality to bury within a casket.
No. Derech Olam is outside in Chutz La'aretz that we carry a person to the kever in an aron.
Okay.
So I think we would do that regardless. But the Kfur itself, if we can do it in the ground, it's probably the better thing to do.
So would this be something you would recommend the local Chevra Kadishas encourage?
I would. That's exactly right. That's what we are now recommending.
Meaning carry in a casket and bury without a casket.
Carrying the casket, carrying the skin, giving that as an option, where you could bury in the casket and bring it to the grave in the casket and then remove the bottom. But let me show you what we created.
What do you call it?
What do we call it? Yeah. The film directors call it the Houdini box. I'm just kidding, but I'm serious. That's what they call it. But that's not what it's called. It's called a casket that opens at the bottom. We haven't officially given it. We have to get a name for it. Okay. Better than the Houdini box. Okay. Anyway, we'll work on it. It's a bottomless aron. Okay. How's that? Now. If you look at this box, I hope everybody can see, if you look at the box, you will note that it's a regular plain pine box. It's actually rectangular, okay, and that is to give us the greatest amount of width throughout the casket. And it has ropes that come out on either end of the casket, okay, with a knot, so that the rope won't fall into the casket, okay? And these ropes are below the cover. Now what you don't see from here is that these ropes, the way they look, it looks like the hole is drilled straight horizontally into the casket. It's not. The hole is drilled almost straight down, almost vertically, but on a slight angle, so that it goes through the side of the box, but in a way in which the rope will not get caught. It goes very easily, gets pulled up and pulled out, and so on. Okay, so that is what the casket looks like from the outside. You would obviously have to designate, as you would in any casket that is rectangular and doesn't have any fancy lining, and you're not going to know which is the head of the foot. So you would have to designate which is the head and which is the foot. Okay, next. Now you can see the inside of this box. The inside of the box, the body is lying on two planks with a gap of about 4 inches. Each of these planks are actually about 10 inches wide. And if you notice, there is a board at the top of the box and also at the bottom, which you can't see, that goes across the entire bottom, goes across both sides of the casket and connects both sides of the casket, and that is doweled. That doesn't move at all. It's stationary. It's about 10 inches from the end of the casket. This one might actually be an earlier version, it might have been about 8 inches, but the ones that we're selling now are about 10 inches long on either end that support those planks. Now if you go to the next one, you get a much closer look. Now it looks like 10 inches, okay, or close to it. You see that miter? You see where it's angled? That's so that when you pull out the boards, the head doesn't move. The head is right in the center. When you pull the boards out, the head isn't going to move at all.
And is that at both ends?
It's right here. This is the head. No, the other side is the feet. The head is right here. The other side is the feet.
So this is what we tell you, which is the head.
Right. Well, on the inside, once you open it, you know, from the outside you won't know. So this is the head, and it's why we actually made the miter a little sharper even. So this is what it looks like on the inside at the head, so you understand that if you have some of that excelsior on top and you have the pillow in the middle, it's not going to move the head. The head will stay stationary. Next. Now, once the body is all the way in the ground, when it's at the cemetery, before you lower it, you pull out the ropes. You extend them fully. They come out about 8 feet. Okay? These ropes get fully extended all the way about 8 feet out. However, the board is still flat. The board hasn't been touched yet, okay? Before the body is lowered, the board is completely flat. He's just showing you how this is once it's in the ground. Once the body is in the ground, you have 4 ropes, 2 on either end, that extend outside of the grave. Body's been lowered, casket's been perfectly positioned. 2 people, 1 on each side, 2 people on one side and 2 people on the other side. Take those ropes and just pull up. Now take a look at the rope. I don't know if you can see it so clearly from here, but the rope is coming from underneath the plank. Okay? The rope is actually, the knot is actually visible. You can see it on the foot side, on his right hand. If you look at the knot on the one that corresponds to his right hand, you will see the knot is at the top. The rope comes from underneath the board. So when you pull up, it naturally pulls the board up this way. It's amazing. We've done this about 5 times. I will tell you the amount of effort it takes to pull it up is almost effortless. There's almost no tension at all. Next one. Now it's fully extended. Here you can see it clearly how the rope comes from underneath, and it pulls it up very naturally because, as I said, the hole that is drilled is almost straight through. If you see it here, you'll see it's about 1.5 inches from the top of the casket, but on the outside it's about 1/2 inch from the top of the casket. So that through a very thin piece of wood, it travels about 1 inch, so it's pretty almost straight, and it stays there. That's where the board stays. Go on.
Why doesn't it fall over? Why doesn't it fall over?
Because the body is lying against it, so it won't fall over.
The rope is pulled from the other side.
What?
The rope is pulled from the other side.
The rope, I'm saying, well, once it's stationary, why doesn't it then fall over? Because the body generally keeps it from falling over. The only reason it comes up is to pull it up, okay? But once it's up, more often than not, at least one part of the body is touching it. And at that point, it'll hold it in place, okay? Go on. So that's basically it, okay? It's a very, I will tell you, the first time we tried it, there was a man in Far Rockaway who was very taken with it. He actually wanted to give us a very large donation to make this but he was very uncomfortable with it. He didn't, by the way, give us the large donation. He gave it to us, but not for this. But in any case, he's a part of a Chevra Kadisha, but this was his mother-in-law who was being buried. And he didn't want to be involved in pulling up the thing the first time. He was uncomfortable with it. But then we had a few months later, we had a friend of his that passed away, and we used the box again, okay? And he said, I want to be one of the people who pulls it up. I want to know what it feels like. And he was amazed at how simple and, you could tell there's no tension, it really works.
It's plastic, but normally it's ground, it's earth.
Well, yeah, right. here it's sitting on plastic. Normally it's earth. There is a board underneath.
Now,
and
those horizontal boards.
they stay. It's not right. So the head is going to still stay on a board. The head is not going to be directly on the ground, but almost the entire body will be.
Who is going to be allowed to?
Members of the Chevra Kadisha or members of the community, whoever is at the cemetery that normally would lower it down or fill the grave will do that.
Okay, and whoever's going to fill the cave also?
Right.
Okay, is there a mark on the rope so that before you lower the box, you pull out of it, but you don't pull out too much?
It's an excellent question. The answer is you pull up enough, and if you feel the slightest amount of tension, then you stop. There is some. You realize that you could feel that you have to pull. You have to pull up.
A lot of humidity, wouldn't things tend to swell? Perhaps you would consider putting a mark on the rope.
Not a bad idea at all. It's an excellent idea.
When you see that mark,
I'll tell you why it's an excellent idea. Because the one time that we almost had a problem, somebody was stepping on that cord as we were lowering the casket. And they didn't realize it. But if you would see that mark, then it would have given it away. We caught it, and thank God it was fine. But it's, Rabbi Trapper was buried in such an area, so was Rabbi Kornblatt, by the way. Some of our people here know.
But the top of the aroma has the wood piece of cloth.
Complete wood, it never gets touched. You see, the way it's constructed, there is no way that it could ever pull out the board. Even if you pull all the way and the board comes up, it'll only come up till the level of that hole. It can't go higher than that. There's no way the cover will ever come off.
Same cost as a regular box?
Same cost as a regular box. They're selling it now, I think he's selling it for about $250, okay, for the box, and then the shipping, if it's going to be shipped to Florida, there will be a shipping charge. But he wants to ship in bulk. He prefer that he ship like 10 or a dozen, or whatever, so he's saving the shipping. But what he do?
Yeah, well, the question is, certain states, like in Illinois, I don't think they could do it.
In Illinois, they do worse than that.
Sure.
In Illinois and Chicago, they take people out of the box.
nobody sees this.
Aren't the cemeteries there that
There are liners.
Yeah.
If there are liners, I would probably not do this unless you have an open lined bottom, an open liner. But if you don't have an open liner, if you can fill earth into the liner, there's no problem. But if you can't fill earth into the liner, I would probably not do it.
Wait, why would that make a difference?
Because to put it on concrete, on raw concrete, I think the body lying on raw concrete, I think might be just very uncomfortable. In other words, it's a question of when you pull it out even for it to hit the concrete, it's not, I think it would be very uncomfortable. If it was in the earth, I'd say yes, in the concrete, I don't know.
That's very big.
But we talked about having it available in a much wider size. If it's really that tight, I would not use the arm. To be very honest with you. If it's really a person that's very, very large and barely fits into the urn, it's not an urn that could be used. It'll just make it that much tighter. There isn't 2 inches to be given. Each of these pieces of wood is 3/4 of an inch, so you're talking about 1.5 inches. If a person's really very wide and fills the entire urn, it's not for them. Okay? I don't know what they do. I don't know what they do in Borough Park for such a person either, for that matter.
Just slides up the side.
It's unbelievable how it slides up on the side. Yep, I will tell you, when we do it, we also try to be very careful to wrap the sovave as tightly as possible. But whatever it is, I will tell you, we have done it now enough times that I feel it's a very, very, very practical and simple process. It's just the Chevra's Kadisha who prepare the body have to know what it is that they're doing. They have to know, first of all, that how the board is set up before you put the body in, so that you set it up the right way so that the rope is coming from underneath, because someone who doesn't know could just put it with the rope coming from the top, and then you really will have a problem, because it really won't do the trick. So you have to know what you're doing. That's one of the reasons I'm showing it. Okay, we're hoping to develop instructions for it as well, so that it'll be very clear.
I'd be surprised if the cemeteries in Florida would let us do it.
We'll have to see. Mount Nebo. Hey, that's it. What's that?
Are you done?
No, one more thing, and then we will let you go.
Okay,
Yeah.
there's a cremation problem many times comes down to being a financial problem.
Okay, excellent
So
point.
when we talk about the Chevra Kadisha taking more responsibility for this means we should be having bake sales or raffles too, because that is many
Let
times.
me put it to you this way.
The burial is buying the papers.
We are working on a number of things, we'll leave it at that will hopefully help with that. I will tell you, there are probably a dozen cases where we have brought bodies from Florida to be buried in Hebrew-free burial in New York, because they will do the burial for nothing.
Wow.
The only thing you need to cover is the flight and the cost of pickup at the hospital here. But we have taken people to New York, especially people who didn't have family, where they were buried. They will even bury, Hebrew-free burial will even bury in a grave in New York that this person might own, as long as you cover the cost of the flight and the cost of the grave opening. But they will pick up all of the funeral home cost, okay, in Florida. And we are actually looking to develop a model like Hebrew-free burial in South Florida. We are talking about it. That is what we are looking to do, and Rabbi Yaakov Lyons is heading up the project, so together with us. But that is, so if you know someone who would be willing to support this type of a thing, we could use the support. But I think in any case, I will tell you that in New York, the vast majority of people who are cremated are not being cremated for financial reasons. The funeral home that does the largest number of cremations among all of our funeral homes that we service 12, is the funeral home in Great Neck, which is the wealthiest community that we service. They do the highest rate of cremation, which is 30% in our area. Here in Florida, it's way above that. In California, it's way above that. In Texas, it's way above that. But 30%, Rabbi Lyons just sent me an email a couple of days ago. It says that there was a recent study, 2013 in Palm Beach County, 49.4% of people were cremated. It's not Jews only, it's everyone, but I can promise you that Jews have a very close ratio. It's not uncomfortable. It's not different. And there's a very high percentage of Jews that are there. And we have to realize, you know, it recently struck me, there was a story about more like a half a year ago, about some nut in Cleveland who had a couple of women that he was enslaved, and who he enslaved in his basement, okay? And I remember hearing people who were very liberal, you know, liberals with a capital L, okay, who said this guy should have capital punishment. Now, we don't believe in capital punishment, but this guy deserves to be killed. You know, there's nothing better for him. He deserves death. Why? Because the thought of enslaving somebody for years, okay, is a terrible thing. And it struck me that what we call Jews who are secular are tinokot shenishbu. They are basically captured and enslaved children who just don't have any knowledge. They were taken from the Jewish people and our religion and all of our understanding of life and our faith and our beliefs at a young age. They were captured and they don't know anything. So it struck me that here are God's children that have been captured and technically spiritually enslaved for thousands of years. For hundreds of years, or dozens of years, whatever it is. Certainly 100 years in America. It's been since the Jews have really begun to move away from any knowledge of Yiddishkeit. Okay? But it doesn't really, no one feels that way. No one feels like here are captive children. But that's really what they are. They're just captive to a secular society. It's different. No one is holding them what appears to be against their will. But the fact is that's what they are. So we need to do whatever we can do. That's the bottom line. If there's a relative or a cousin or a neighbor or a co-worker or someone we just know, ask the question. Do whatever you can to encourage it. We'll be there to help you to explain it, by the way. I'll tell you a couple. I got a call from a Chabad rabbi. Maybe I mentioned this at the Zayanada Suda. Did I mention this? I got a call from a Chabad rabbi in California that there's a woman in his community who wants to be cremated. He says, Rabbi, I don't know what I can tell her. She has no family. It's not an issue of money. She has plenty of money. And the money's going to go to who knows where. He says to some, pet cemetery. I'm not a pet cemetery, but some place that takes care of animals or whatever. She's an animal owner. I said, fine. I said, why does she want to get buried? She says, who's going to come visit my grave? Who cares? Okay, that was her response. He says, nothing I can tell her. What can I tell her? She has no one. It doesn't mean anything to her. So I said to her, go back and tell her the following. If you had the opportunity to leave a message to the world, what would that be? Maybe it's treat animals nicely. Whatever, it doesn't matter what it is. I said, tell her to buy a grave at the entrance to the cemetery in her community and prepay a funeral and the biggest monument she could possibly put up that they would allow, and have her message emblazoned on the monument. You can be sure that everyone will remember Esther's monument because it's going to be right out there. Do it in a marble that's unusual. And you'll bring an important message to the world. But why should you be cremated? Okay? It's an amazing thing, and it worked. He called me back. He said, Rabbi, I don't know, I can't believe it. It worked. She went, she made a prearrangement. I don't know what she wrote on it, whatever it is. She did it. Okay? I'm just using that as an example. There are crazy stories. I can tell you story upon story. But we are very successful. We had a case just last week in the nursing home. I got a call from the chaplain of the nursing home. The man had a pre-arrangement to be cremated. It was in his folder, in his file, that he's going to be cremated. And the chaplain found out about it, and he asked him why. And there was a bunch of them, it didn't really have any reason, but who's going to, there's no one to take care of it. The rabbi said, I'll take care of you, we'll set it all up. We took care of it. The man now has a pre-arrangement with Hebrew free burial to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. Okay? It can be done. It needs sometimes just a question of reaching out. I will never forget a call I got from Lakewood, New Jersey. Lakewood, New Jersey, I get a call from a young man in Lakewood who's involved in building. There was an architect that lived in Florida that was coming into Lakewood on a regular basis. He built many of the yeshivas in Lakewood at almost no cost. The man accomplished tremendous things. And he got very friendly with these two Lakewood guys who were the builders. And his wife called one of them and said, Jack, my husband passed away. I just felt I should let you know. And he said, well, I'd like to fly down to the funeral. And she said, there's not going to be a funeral. We're having a memorial service. So Jack said to her, what are you talking about? I know he has graves in New Jersey. They used to live in New Jersey, and they moved to Florida. She says, yeah, but my daughter doesn't want it. They're not burying it in New Jersey. He looked on the internet, and he couldn't find anywhere in the Torah where it says, you shall not cremate. Okay? So he decided, now here's a guy with a yeshiva background. Not yeshiva, but a strong day school background, some kind of Talmud Torah background, certainly knew a lot about Judaism, about Yiddishkeit, and was traditional. Jack never dreamed about asking the question. He said he knew he had a grave, he didn't think it was an issue. And in the end, Jack spoke to the wife, and he couldn't convince her, but he got her consent to talk to me. After 2 hours of conversation, she agreed to have him buried. Okay? And she was, I knew I had her. You know when I knew I had her? When she started screaming, she says, why didn't he talk to Jack before he died? Like, why are you putting me through this? You know, Jack, he should have talked to Jack, not look on the internet and Google. That's when I knew I had her, because it was, you could see the emotion finally got to her. And she agreed. An hour after she agreed, my office gets a call from the daughter, who unfortunately was intermarried, and who said, please stop harassing my mother and stay out of our life. And that was the end of it. He was cremated. But there's no question that had he spoken to Jack, it would have been very different. And the point I'm trying to say is that, so you know, there are so many variations of this story. I will tell you, I had a crazy case. This is a man who was from, as a child. His wife wanted to be buried in a grave next to her parents. In Beth David, her husband was crippled. He said, it's hard for me to visit her grave. They had never had any family. They were only the two of them, and he was crippled. He says, I can't go to her grave in New Jersey, in Beth David. They lived in New Jersey. He says, I'll cremate her, and this way I'll have her urn with me. So, but he says, I'll take some of the ashes and I'll put it in her grave in Beth David. So I said, why not do it differently? She was still alive. I said, why not suggest that he have a hairdresser come in and give her a haircut and cut her hair in beautiful locks. Wash it first. Let him keep locks of her hair and all kinds of other things. As a memento, it's a lot more meaningful. At least it's part of her. It's not her ashes. It's her. It's part of her. Probably more meaningful than her ashes. It was a great idea. He went back and forth. In the end, he didn't buy it. What I'm trying to tell you is, though, there are a lot of ways we've had that work, by the way. It's not something that, there are a lot. What you need to do is, I hate to say to think out of the box, because we're trying to think in the box. But the point is you have to think out of the box. That's the point. You have to think, you have to know what the source is, you have to know the reasons, and very often it's not money. If it is money, we can work with them. Yes.
I know, when you're talking to liberals, a lot of people think that it's better for the environment to be cremated. And you can Google it and prove to them that that's
Not the case. It's on our website. We have a special website for anti-cremation called peacefulreturn.org. One word, peacefulreturn.org. It has all kinds of videos on it. It's a very, very nice website with articles and all kinds of things that it doesn't look very orthodox. And of course, it does have a lot of orthodox stuff on it, but it's not written for Orthodox people. But nevertheless, it should give them at least a pause. And you need to work with them.
We have brochures for people to take. You can give to people.
We have many brochures. Some more aggressive, some more benign, that answer questions in a very, very non-Orthodox way, just basic Jewish law and tradition, and answering questions about cremation in a very, the one that we have is the most frequently asked questions about cremation. We have some copies here. We can leave them for you to take and give out. These are the kind of things we just encourage you as members of Chevra Kadisha to just begin a grassroots movement in your community, to sign a card, to get those cards, to encourage people to reach out. Do something in your shul. Bring Rabbi Lyons in one night to speak about this to the community. Bring someone else in who will speak about it in the community. Encourage people to look at our website, both our websites, where we have a lot of information. You can learn from your own reading of the brochures. You will learn how to speak to people who might consider cremation. The first question is why? What is the reason? I will tell you one of the most common reasons. I don't want to burden anybody to visit, and the reason is guilt. They never visited their own parents, and they don't want to put their children, and you know what? They'd rather not be there and be ignored than be there altogether. They'd rather not find out that no one's going to come to the grave. Even though how are they going to know? They don't necessarily believe that they will know, but they'd rather not know. There's a famous joke. They say, cremate me and sprinkle my ashes in Bloomingdale's. I know my daughter will visit once a month. And I think there's a lot of truth in that, because I really believe that one of the things that drives many people is the fact that they don't want to be ignored, and they themselves ignore their parents. The last thing I will show you is, you don't have that, I'm going to have to show you. There is, what? I don't know if you want to go through the whole video. You want to just open this into an aron, bury it outside the aron in the Chevra. You can put it in the box and put it into the Chevra, on top of the aron, on the side of the aron, but not into the box. Okay? That is, I think it's a bizarre both for the Shemus and for the person. Certainly I wouldn't do it without, it's not respectful. I certainly would do it without asking permission. But even to put it into the Chevra.
What about t-shirts?
What about?
Pictures.
Pictures. Pictures are, from a Jewish traditional perspective, I would put it in the category of, it's foolish, it doesn't have much meaning. Within a couple of hours, if not days, the pictures aren't going to have any color because the earth, the moisture of the earth will discolor it.
But sometimes we ask to do pictures.
I understand. If they do, I would consider it in the category of nonsense and narishkeit, and I would bury it. But I would even put it into the urn. Put it at the foot of the urn. Okay, I wouldn't put it on top of the body, which some people want to do. But I would put it in the urn. It goes into the category of nonsense. Okay, it's not. That's what they wanted. That's their request, so we do it. But it's nonsensical. Yes.
So far we have people that can ask the same. Again, is in the cemetery.
They have what? Ebenezer, fine. That's perfectly appropriate. Not in the cemetery, but in the person's own urn. In the urn I wouldn't put it. In the kever, it's fine. It's a source for the person. There's nothing wrong with doing it, but it should be in its own box outside of the urn. Okay, now, I would like to take a minute and go talk about a Gemara. The Gemara, the Talmud tells us in Moed Katan, it tells us a story. It tells us a story that there was a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Hamnuna, and he was traveling in the south of Eretz Yisrael, and he came to a town where he heard that someone had died. How did he hear somebody died? They didn't have, in those days, they didn't have, the internet, there was no radio station, so how did you hear? He heard because they used to blow shofar, and they had a certain type of sound from the shofar that they knew that someone had died. And that's how they would let people know, because we're not supposed to give bad news. So you blew a shofar, that's how people knew someone had passed away. There were other ways they did it. So he heard the shofar was blown, and he saw people are working. And people still sitting and working. People were picking from an orchard, whatever it was. And he was very upset. He said these people should be put into cherem. They should be excommunicated from the community. Why? There's a halacha, there's a law that says, meis ba'ir, if a person dies in the city, the entire city is responsible to make sure that they get buried. No one is allowed to work. Everyone is responsible to take it. It's not just a family. We're all a big family. When it comes to burying somebody, everybody is responsible. So how can they keep working? So they answered him, Ika Chaburasa Be'ir. There's a Chevra Kadisha in the city. Oh, there's a Chevra Kadisha in the city. Then the Chevra Kadisha takes the responsibility off everybody else, and they become responsible to do what needs to be done. And therefore, everyone else has a lot of work. So the Chevra Kadisha doesn't only do chesed with the dead, but the Chevra Kadisha actually does chesed with the living, because it allows them to continue going about their business even when someone has died and they no longer have the responsibility. I would venture to ask a question. I would say in our world, where there is a Chevra Kadisha, but where most people are not looking for the Chevra Kadisha. Most people have no interest in a Chevra Kadisha. What is the responsibility of the community? And what is the responsibility of the Chevra Kadisha? It's a tough question. I'd love to ask the question to a big tzaddik and get an answer, which I've never done really. But I would say simply, there certainly is a responsibility on every member of the Jewish community, on some level, to try to see that everyone is buried, number one, and if possible, buried k'halachah, to be buried with tradition, to be buried with a tahara, to be buried in a way that is really respectful. One second, let me just finish the thought, and then I'll take a question, not a problem. I think, and I would venture to say, that we who are involved in Chevra Kadisha may have a greater responsibility. Not that I think we can go out there and snatch bodies and bury them and do anything that is illegal or anything like that. But at least in the sense of creating awareness at least in the sense, whatever we can do, whether it's within our own family, whether it's within on our block, in our building, in our neighborhood, in our shul, to raise awareness, to just start talking about the fact that people really need to reach out. I remember having a discussion in South Florida in 1984 with Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, Zichrono Livracha. And this was at, I don't know if the hotel still exists, but it was called the Savion, if I remember correctly. What? The Savron. You got it, Savron. Still there? No. Okay, anyway, the Savron Hotel. We met, and he said to me, who is a mace mitzvah in America? That was a question he asked me. Who would be considered a mace mitzvah? A mace mitzvah means someone who has no one to bury them. And his answer was astounding. His answer was, Ayede Yid Verstapt. Every Jew that dies. Every Jew that dies in America in 1984 is in the category of a mace mitzvah. And I'll tell you very simply, in 1971, which is not that much before 1984, in Queens, New York, not in Florida, the percentage of Jewish people who were having tahara was under 5%. Having tahara. They were not cremated, it was pre-cremation. But tahara was unknown. Everyone assumed if you went to a Jewish funeral home, they did it the Jewish way. That was the assumption. Unless they were a member of a shul that had a Chevra Kadisha, or they lived in Borough Park, maybe it was different. Very, very, very from community. But other than that, it was unknown. But there are other issues. People die and the cemetery is not open, or people get buried and then they don't realize they're being buried in a section of a cemetery that isn't necessarily fully Jewish, never mind traditional. There's a million issues. Medical examiners that get involved. You know, medical examiners are referred to probably 50% of cases in most places. And not if years ago, before we had intervention with medical examiners, many of these people at all times no one even knew or asked. So it was but today, I think the challenge that faces every Jew, among many challenges, but a very, very, very basic challenge, the kind of challenge that places a responsibility on everyone in the community to take note, is the challenge of cremation, and we need to address it. And just having a conversation with someone about what can we do. Well, we have started doing some things, okay, about cremation. And we're going to look at something now which may not seem to be really directed at cremation, but is very much directed at cremation. It's something that addresses other areas, not only cremation. But the point is that we need to, besides what we're going to look at, we need to begin raising awareness in this area. To reach out, certainly to friends that we have who are not traditional. And not to assume that because they are somewhat traditional, it means they're going to get buried, because I must tell you that it is now people who are, I know people who went to yeshiva, Flatbush's kids who are being cremated. Okay? It's now slowly seeping into not our community, but certainly the periphery of our community. And I definitely think that we need to take action wherever we can. A lot of things we can do. It's not for an hour in an afternoon like this, but I would like to start by introducing you to something that we created. I say we, it means NASC, National Association of Chevra Kadisha, which is a card that we recommend that every Jewish person carry. And the card encourages people to, first of all, fill out a health care proxy and a living will. So that if, God forbid, they come into a hospital where they cannot speak for themselves, there will be someone who can speak for them, who will be knowledgeable of what their wishes are. and that they should know that there are certain things that may require a question. There are certain decisions that may not be made simply because I don't want that, or I don't need that, or I really would never want to be in that position. Sometimes a feeding tube might be a terrible thing to want, especially we work in the Chevra Kadisha. We see what it looks like at the end. On the other hand, there are people who live for many years with a feeding tube. I have a brother-in-law who's been on a feeding tube for about 1.5 years now. He doesn't have the greatest quality of life, but he davens 3 times a day, talks to his grandchildren, his children come to visit. He has a life. He listens to Torah on the phone. He has a very, very high level, and he's extremely happy. A high level of life. 2 years ago almost, when he first, actually it's over 2 years ago, when he first took sick, they didn't give him more than a day or 2 to live. And they were discussing DNRs. No one thought he'd pull through, and he did, and he's a very happy man today, even though he has a feeding tube, unfortunately. So these are issues that are complex, but we need to sign one of those cards. We need to have a healthcare proxy, and to have a card which lets people know that you have a healthcare proxy. The card attaches to your license or your identification card, so that in any emergency they will know you have this healthcare proxy, and they will know who the proxy is because it's listed on the card. This card also objects to autopsy. Okay, so that if God forbid you're in a state like Florida, where there is no law that says if you object to autopsy they will accommodate you, this card doesn't guarantee that they will accommodate you, but it certainly makes for a much stronger case if it ever goes to court. And most lawyers believe that it would have tremendous impact. And in some states, like California and others, Minnesota, I believe, this actually will be an objection that the law will recognize and will follow. Of course, this is not in the case of homicide or health hazard that may be there, but other than that, it will accomplish all of that. The last line in this card says, I also object to the cremation of my body. I created this card mainly for that last line, because I get calls from people all over the world, actually, from Eretz Yisrael and from Europe, who have family members here who are not religious and who are being cremated. And they're calling me because suddenly they found out that grandpa died or their sibling died and they're being cremated and they don't know what to do. So I'm kind of the expert, and they call me, what can I do? My question to them invariably is, why did you wait till now? And the reason I ask the question is not to put them on the spot, but that they will talk to the leftovers of their family who has not yet died, and at least understand that there is something that needs to be done. So the answer that is most common is I couldn't broach the subject. How do you talk to your sibling, whom you're not that close to, about what's going to be when they die? Not a comfortable subject, especially when you're just calling to wish Happy New Year. Okay? So what do? Number one. Then there's the second problem. You've talked to your sibling, you've talked to your grandparent, you've talked to someone in your family or your neighbor down the hall, and they've said, you know, you're right. I think I should be buried. But then they die and no one knows they said that. This happens all the time. The most famous case was a case about 2 years ago where a woman died. She was in the refrigerator for 4 months. Because she had a will that said, I want to be cremated. She had told her nephew a few years earlier, when she was 102, that she agrees not to be. This woman had her wits with her until the day she died at 105. But at 102, she finally agreed to be buried, and not only that, she talked to other people about it. She had a grave ready, but they never put it in writing. And when the end of the story was, there was one member of the family who says she wants to be cremated. In fact, there were a bunch of family members, because everyone knew Ethel was going to be cremated. She cremated her husband. She wanted to be cremated. It was a deal they made. Do you know that this woman's father was a Rav?
Was what?
A rabbi who learned by Rabbi Yצחak Elchonon. Okay? But they went this family who are now learning in yeshivas in Israel, and was one of these grandchildren who actually talked her into being buried. And there was a woman she was friendly with who was a member of Chabad, and she talked to her and convinced her that she had a grave ready for her right next to her own mother, who was this woman's best friend. And she was thrilled. But no one wrote it down. We went to court twice. The first time was after 3 months, because we were hoping that the funeral home would show us, all we asked was that the funeral home show us her will. The nephew, who was the executor of the will, who wanted her to be cremated, refused to show the will. So there was a tug of war. It was, don't ask, it was very complex. In the end, we went to court, or actually the funeral home went to court because they were tired of keeping her in the freezer. And so they went to court, and the judge said, when a number of people showed up in court saying that we know that she wanted to be buried, is there anything in writing? And the answer was no. Sorry, we have a will that says she wants to be cremated, which of course was written 15 years earlier, and that was the final word. So we appealed in the hope that we would be able to hear testimony from some very professional and very impressive people. The judge refused to hear testimony. And the decision was not to appeal again, because it was one person's word against another. It looked like the Orthodox wanted her buried, the non-Orthodox didn't, and she herself cremated her husband. There were just too many things. She had a will and a pre-need arrangement to be cremated. There was just no way to win it, and we felt if we lose again, it would create a precedent in the country, because it would be at a much higher level of court system. Whatever it is, we backed off. It cost us $30,000 to fight that appeal. So, if we had in writing, if people knew of this card, and now you have someone, when they agree to sign this card has a lot of legal power. It's witnessed, and it has a lot of power. So I created this card so that people can give this card to people who are thinking of cremation, and explain to them when they see the card. You don't give it to them and say you shouldn't be cremated. You give them the card and say, you really should have a healthcare proxy, and you should carry this with you so that people will know who the healthcare proxy is. And when they read it and it says I object to cremation, they say, oh, I can't be cremated. I mean, I can't sign this card. I want to be cremated. You're kidding. You want to be cremated? Why would you want to do a stupid thing like that? Okay? And then you're in the door. You can then carry on the conversation in a very different way. And you can do it for a long time. It doesn't have to be immediate. So and then if they do sign the card, it's in writing. So this was the card, but it's worthwhile for all the other reasons as well. It's a good card, forget the cremation part. So we're going to watch this, it's 10 minutes. I think it's very important because